In a snowbound manor in Bruges, Hercule Poirot faces a chilling mystery. Angeline van den Bosch, a bride-to-be, is blackmailed over a dark secret from her past. As a grand engagement party unfolds, a murder shocks the guests, and clues point to a web of mistaken identities, betrayal, and hidden truths. With a storm trapping everyone inside, Poirot's little grey cells must unravel the killer's motive before another life is lost. Will he expose the mastermind behind the deadly charade? Chapter 1. The invitation to Bruges. Hercule Poirot sat at his polished mahogany desk in his London flat, the morning light streaming through the tall windows, casting a warm glow on the neatly arranged papers before him. The air smelled faintly of lavender polish, a testament to the meticulous care of his valet Georges, who had just left to fetch the morning's post. Poirot's small, precise hands adjusted a silver letter opener, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the desk blotter. His moustache, impeccably waxed, twitched slightly as he contemplated the day's scheduler, rare day with no pressing engagements, a fact that both pleased and unsettled him. The great detective thrived on puzzles, and idleness was a poor substitute for the thrill of unraveling a mystery. The door opened softly, and Georges entered, carrying a small silver tray with a stack of envelopes. "The post, sir," he said, his voice as measured as ever. Georges, a man of middle age, with a face that betrayed nothing, placed the tray on the desk and stepped back, awaiting instructions. "Thank you, Georges," Poirot said, his Belgian accent crisp yet warm. He reached for the topmost envelope, his fingers pausing as he noted the elegant handwriting on the cream-coloured paper. It was addressed to Monsieur Hercule Poirot, consulting detective, with a postmark from Bruges, Belgium. His curiosity piqued, Poirot slit the envelope open with a practiced flick of the letter opener and unfolded the letter within. The paper was thick, embossed with a subtle cresta line rampant, entwined with ivy. The handwriting was feminine, flowing, yet tinged with an urgency that caught Poirot's eye. He adjusted his pince-nez and began to read. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I trust this letter finds you in good health and spirits. My name is Angeline van den Bosch, and I write to you from my family's estate in Bruges. You are, of course, renowned for your unparalleled skill in matters of discretion and deduction, and it is with great trepidation that I seek your assistance. In a matter most delicate, I am to be married in 10 days' time to Monsieur Gédéon Demire, a gentleman of considerable charm and standing. Our engagement was announced last month, and preparations for a grand celebration at our manor are underway. However, a shadow has fallen over our joy. For the past 3 weeks, I have received a series of anonymous letters blackmail, I fear, to expose a secret that could ruin not only my engagement but my family's honor. The letters demand a substantial sum, to be delivered at the engagement party itself, or else this secret known only to me and one other will be revealed to all. I cannot divulge the nature of this secret in writing, for fear the letter may be intercepted, but I implore you to attend our celebration as an honored guest. Your presence would allow you to observe, to deduce, and, I hope, to unmask this villain, before irreparable harm is done. I enclose a formal invitation to the engagement party, to be held at the Van den Bosch Manor on the 15th of February. Please, Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you, and I place my trust in your little grey cells to deliver me from this nightmare. Yours in hope." Angeline van den Bosch. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he reread the letter. The mention of blackmail intrigued him, for it was a crime that thrived on secrets. and secrets were the currency of his trade. He reached for the enclosed invitation, a gilt-edged card with the same crest as the letter. It confirmed the date and place, the Van den Bosch Manor, a grand estate on the outskirts of Bruges, known for its opulent gardens and centuries-old architecture. The date was a mere week away, and the urgency of Angeline's plea suggested time was of the essence. Georges Poirot called, his voice sharp but not unkind. "What do you know of the Van den Bosch family of Bruges?" Georges, who had been standing silently by the door, cleared his throat. "Very little, sir, I'm afraid. They are an old family, wealthy, with ties to trade and shipping, I believe. The name is respected in Belgium, though I recall some whispers of a scandal years ago. Nothing specific, just society gossip." "Gossip, Georges, is often the breadcrumb trail to truth," Poirot said, tapping the letter against his chin. "A family of wealth, a secret, a blackmailer. This is no mere domestic squabble. Nan, this is a puzzle worthy of Hercule Poirot." He rose from his desk, his movements precise, and crossed to the window, gazing out at the bustling London street below. The prospect of a case in Bruges, his homeland, stirred something in him, a mix of nostalgia and anticipation. He had not visited Belgium in some time, and the idea of returning, even under such mysterious circumstances, appealed to him. But it was the challenge of the case itself that truly ignited his interest. Blackmail required cunning, and unmasking a blackmailer required cunning greater still. "Georges, prepare my travel case," Poirot said, turning back to his valet. "We depart for Bruges tomorrow morning. The Orient Express, I think, will be most suitable, and ensure my warmest coat is packed. February in Bruges can be unforgiving." "Very good, sir," Georges replied, bowing slightly before exiting the room. Poirot returned to his desk, spreading out a fresh sheet of paper. With a fountain pen, he began to sketch what he called his mind map, a diagram of names, connections, and questions that would guide his investigation. At the center, he wrote Angeline van den Bosch, circling it. Radiating outward were lines to Gideon de Meer, blackmailer unknown, and secret nature unknown. He paused, considering the possibilities. Was the secret Angeline's alone, or did it involve her, fiancé? Was the blackmailer a guest, a family member, or an outsider? And why demand payment at the engagement party, a public event where exposure would be riskiest? The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Poirot telegraphed a response to Angeline, confirming his attendance and requesting discretion. About his true purpose, he instructed Georges to gather any available information on the Van den Bosch family and Gideon de Meer, though he suspected little would be found in London. By evening, he sat by the fire, sipping a tisane and reviewing the letter once more. The crest on the paper nagged at him. It was familiar, yet he could not place it. Perhaps it was a memory from his days in the Belgian police force. Long ago, the journey to Bruges was uneventful, though the Orient Express lived up to its reputation for luxury. Poirot, dressed in a tailored suit and his warmest overcoat, spent much of the trip in his compartment, refining his mind map. He added Van den Bosch Manor and guests unknown to the diagram, noting that the snow forecast for Bruges could complicate matters. A snowbound manor, he mused, was both a detective's dream and nightmare. Everyone trapped, yet everyone a suspect. Upon arriving in Bruges, Poirot was struck by the city's timeless beauty. The canals glimmered under a grey sky, their waters reflecting the medieval spires and gabled houses. A hired car took him to the outskirts, where the Van den Bosch Manor stood. A sprawling Gothic estate surrounded by snow-dusted gardens. The manor's towers loomed against the darkening sky, their stonework weathered but proud. As the car crunched along the gravel drive, Poirot noted the high walls and iron gates security. Perhaps, but also a prison if the snow worsened. At the entrance, a tall, impeccably dressed butler greeted him. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume," the man said, his English accented but flawless. "I am Archibald Sterling, the butler. Miss Van den Bosch is expecting you." "Merci, Monsieur Sterling," Poirot replied, studying the butler. Archibald was in his 50s, with sharp grey eyes and a posture that suggested military training. His demeanour was polite, yet Poirot sensed a guardedness, as if the man were assessing him in return. Archibald led Poirot through a grand foyer, its walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Van den Bosches. The air smelled of beeswax and old wood, and a massive chandelier glittered above. They ascended a wide staircase to a drawing-room, where Angeline Van den Bosch awaited. She was younger than Poirot had expected, perhaps 25, with auburn hair pinned elegantly and eyes that betrayed both intelligence and fear. She rose from a velvet settee, extending a hand. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I scarcely know where to begin." "Begin, Mademoiselle, with the truth," Poirot said, taking her hand gently. "Tell me of these letters, and why you fear this secret so greatly." Angeline hesitated, glancing at Archibald, who stood by the door. "Leave us, please," she said. The butler bowed and exited, closing the door softly. Angeline gestured for Poirot to sit, then retrieved a small bundle of letters from a locked drawer in a rosewood desk. "There are 5, she said, handing them to Poirot. Each arrived at weekly intervals, always by post, with no return address. They threatened to reveal something from my past, something I thought buried." Poirot opened the first letter, written in a bold, slanted hand. "You think your future is secure, but the past cannot be hidden. Pay 50,000 francs at the engagement party, or all will know what you did in Cape Town. Deliver the money in a black valise left by the library fireplace at midnight. No police, or the truth will burn brighter than your love." The other letters were similar, escalating in tone but offering no new details. Poirot noted the mention of Cape Town a clue, perhaps, to the secret's origin. "This Cape Town," he said, looking at Angeline. "You have been there." She paled, her hands twisting in her lap. "Yes, 3 years ago, with my mother. We were visiting family, friends. I cannot say more, not yet. But I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I have done nothing criminal." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And this Gideon Demire, does he know of these letters?" "No," Angeline said quickly. "I couldn't bear to tell him. He's a good man, but he has his own burdens. His family is from Istanbul, but he spent time in South Africa. I fear this secret could destroy us." Poirot's mind raced, adding Cape Town and South Africa to his mental map. The coincidence of both Angeline and Gideon having ties to that region was no accident. "Mademoiselle, I will attend your party as a guest, but I must observe all who are present. You will introduce me as a family friend, nothing more. And these letters, keep them safe, but tell no one else." Angeline nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I knew you would understand." As Poirot left the drawing-room, Archibald reappeared, offering to show him to his guest suite. The manor was a labyrinth of corridors, each lined with tapestries and antique furniture. Poirot's room was luxurious, with a four-poster bed and a view of the snow-covered gardens. But his thoughts were elsewhere. The blackmailer's choice of the engagement party intrigued him. Why demand payment in such a public setting? Was it bravado or a calculated move to implicate someone else? That evening, Poirot joined the other guests for a pre-party dinner in the dining hall. The table was set with crystal and silver, and a fire roared in the massive hearth. Angeline introduced him as a family friend, and Poirot took the opportunity to study the guests. Gédéon Demire was a handsome man in his 30s, with dark eyes and a reserved manner. His brother Zachariah was younger, with a nervous energy that contrasted with Gédéon's calm. Angeline's mother, Cassandra Van Den Bosch, was a regal woman in her 50s, her sharp gaze missing nothing. Other guests included Major Felix Hagen, a retired soldier with a booming laugh, and Ruana, a young maid who moved silently but seemed to watch everyone. As the meal progressed, Poirot noted small details. Zachariah's frequent glances at Cassandra's subtle disapproval of Gédéon, and Major Hagen's overly familiar manner with the staff. The conversation turned to the weather, with warnings of a severe snowstorm approaching. "We may be snowed in by tomorrow," Cassandra remarked, her tone clipped. "A pity for the party, but we'll make do." Poirot smiled politely, but his mind was elsewhere. The storm could trap the blackmailer and the secret within the manor's walls. He sipped his wine, his eyes scanning the room. Somewhere among these faces was a villain, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until the truth was revealed. The dinner ended with plans for the engagement party the following evening. As Poirot retired to his room, he updated his mind map, adding the guests' names and their possible motives. The letters, the secret, the manners, isolation, all were pieces of a puzzle that only his little grey cells could solve. He lay awake, listening to the wind howl outside, knowing that the next few days would test his skills to their fullest. Chapter 2. The snowbound manor. Hercule Poirot stepped off the train at Bruges station, his polished shoes crunching against the frosty platform. The air was sharp, carrying the bite of an impending snowstorm. He adjusted his immaculate overcoat, his moustache twitching as he surveyed the quaint cobblestone city, its medieval spires cloaked in a wintry haze. A carriage awaited him, sent by Angeline Van Den Bosch, and the driver, a stoic man with a weathered face, tipped his cap. "Monsieur Poirot, to the Van Den Bosch manor, yes?" the driver asked in accented English. "Oui, precisement," Poirot replied, his voice crisp as he climbed into the carriage. The letter from Angeline, tucked neatly in his breast pocket, had promised a mystery. Blackmail, she had written, threatened her engagement to Gédéon Demire, a man of wealth and reputation. Poirot's curiosity, ever a restless beast, had been piqued. A case of blackmail, a grand manor, an engagement party, what better stage for the little grey cells to perform? The carriage rattled through Bruges, past canals reflecting the grey sky, until the city gave way to rolling countryside. The Van Den Bosch manor loomed ahead, a Gothic edifice of stone and ivy, its tall windows glowing faintly against the gathering dusk. Snowflakes began to fall, soft at first, then thicker, blanketing the world in silence. As the carriage pulled up to the manor's iron gates, Poirot noted the heavy clouds above. A storm was coming, one that might trap him here. He smiled faintly. Isolation, he knew, often sharpened a mystery's edges. The manor's heavy oak doors swung open, revealing Archibald Sterling, the butler. He was a tall, gaunt man in his 50s, with a face carved from discipline, his grey eyes assessing Poirot with practiced neutrality. "Monsieur Poirot, welcome," he said, his voice smooth but clipped. "Miss Angeline awaits you in the drawing." "Room merci, Monsieur Sterling," Poirot said, stepping into the grand foyer. The air inside was warm, scented with polished wood and wax. A chandelier glittered above, casting light on portraits of stern-faced Van den Bosches, their eyes following him as he handed his hat and coat to a maid. The manor hummed with the quiet tension of an impending gathering, servants moving with purpose, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets. Archibald led Poirot through a corridor lined with tapestries to the drawing-room, where Angeline Van den Bosch stood by a roaring fire. She was a striking woman in her late 20s, with auburn hair pinned elegantly and eyes that flickered with both warmth and worry. Her emerald gown shimmered as she turned to greet him. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming," she said, her voice soft but urgent. She extended a hand, which Poirot took with a slight bow. "I feared you might not make it with the weather turning." "The weather, mademoiselle, is but a minor inconvenience when a puzzle calls," Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling. "Your letter spoke of blackmail. Tell me, what is this trouble that clouds your engagement?" Angeline glanced at Archibald, who lingered by the door. "That will be all, Archibald," she said. The butler bowed and retreated, closing the door with a soft click. Angeline's composure faltered slightly as she motioned for Poirot to sit. "It began 3 weeks ago," she said, lowering herself into a velvet armchair. "Letters, anonymous and cruel, demanding I call off my engagement to Gideon or face ruin. They claim to know secrets about my family, my past. I don't know what they mean, but the threats are specific. They want money, or they'll expose something to destroy us." Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "And these letters? Mademoiselle, you have them." She nodded, retrieving a small bundle from a locked drawer in a nearby desk. The envelopes were plain, the handwriting sharp and angular, written in black ink. Poirot examined them, noting the postmarks local from Bruges itself. The contents were, as Angeline described, demands for payment, vague references to a hidden truth, and threats to ruin her engagement to Gideon Demir, a Turkish diplomat's son with a fortune in trade. One line stood out: "The manor keeps its secrets, but they will not stay buried." "Most intriguing," Poirot murmured, setting the letters down. "And you have told no one else of these?" "Only Gideon," Angeline said, her voice trembling. "He's furious, but he doesn't know what to do. The engagement party is tonight, and I fear the blackmailer may be among the guests." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then we shall observe, mademoiselle. The guilty, they often betray themselves in the smallest of ways. Tell me of your guests." Angeline recounted the list. Her mother, Cassandra Van den Bosch, a widow with a sharp tongue. Gideon's brother, Zachariah Demir, a war veteran with a haunted demeanor. Major Felix Hagen, a family friend with a shadowy military past. Ruana, the maid, who had been with the family for years. And a handful of local acquaintances, including a solicitor, Mr. Willem Clays, and his wife. Elise Poirot listened, committing each name to memory, his mind already sketching the outlines of a puzzle. Before he could ask more, the front bell rang, signaling the arrival of the first guests. The snow, now a thick curtain, had begun to pile against the windows. Angeline rose, her face pale. "They're here," she said. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, be discreet. I don't want a panic." "Discretion, mademoiselle, is my art," Poirot assured her. Rising with a small bow, the drawing-room soon filled with guests, their voices mingling with the crackle of the fire. Gédéon Demire was a tall, handsome man with dark eyes and a reserved smile, though Poirot noted a tension in his posture, as if he carried an invisible weight. Zachariah, his brother, was leaner, his face marked by a scar above his left brow, his hands fidgeting as he stood apart from the others. Major Felix Hagen cut an imposing figure, his military bearing evident in his stiff posture and clipped speech, though his eyes darted about, wary. Cassandra van den Bosch, Angeline's mother, presided over the room with an air of authority. Her silver hair swept into a severe bun, her gaze sharp as she greeted each guest. Rowana, the maid, moved silently, serving drinks with a deference that bordered on invisibility, yet Poirot caught her glancing at the Major more than once. The storm outside worsened, the wind howling as snow piled against the manor's walls. By the time dinner was announced, it was clear no one would leave that night. Archibald appeared at the drawing-room door, his face impassive. "The roads are impassable," he said. "The storm has cut us off. I've prepared rooms for everyone." A murmur of unease passed through the guests, but Cassandra clapped her hands, her voice cutting through the tension. "Then we shall make a night of it. To the dining room, everyone. Let's celebrate my daughter's happiness." The dining room was a spectacle of opulence. A long mahogany table set with crystal and silver, candles casting warm light on the faces of the guests. Poirot took his seat, observing the dynamics. Gédéon and Angeline sat close, their hands brushing, but their smiles were strained. Zachariah drank heavily, his eyes fixed on the table. Major Hagen, seated opposite Poirot, spoke loudly of his time in South Africa during the Boer War, his anecdotes tinged with a bitterness that made others shift uncomfortably. Cassandra watched him with a guarded expression, while Rowana, serving soup, moved with a quiet intensity as the main course was served. Poirot's attention was drawn to small details. The Major's coat, hung on a rack by the door, was slightly too large for him, its hem muddy despite the snow outside. Zachariah's hands trembled as he cut his meat, and Angeline's glances toward her mother held a flicker of fear. The little grey cells, Poirot thought, were already at work. The meal progressed, the conversation growing louder as wine flowed. Then a scream pierced the air. Rowana, standing by the sideboard, dropped a tray of glasses, her face ashen. All eyes turned to her, then followed her gaze to the library door, slightly ajar. Cassandra rose, her voice sharp. "What is it, girl?" Rowana stammered, pointing. "The library, I saw someone." Poirot was on his feet in an instant, moving toward the library with a speed that belied his fastidious demeanor. The guests followed, their voices rising in confusion. Inside the library, lit by a single lamp, Major Felix Hagen lay slumped over a desk, a letter opener protruding from his chest. Blood pooled on the mahogany, staining a crumpled note beside him. His eyes stared blankly, his face frozen in shock. Cassandra gasped, clutching Angeline, who swayed as if she might faint. Gédéon cursed under his breath, while Zachariah stood frozen, his face pale. Archibald, ever composed, stepped forward. "I'll fetch the doctor," he said, but Poirot raised a hand. "Non, monsieur. No one leaves this room until I have examined the scene. The snow ensures our killer cannot escape, but neither can we afford carelessness." Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands moving with precision. The letter opener was buried deep, the wound precise. The Major's coat, he noted, was unbuttoned, and one sleeve was rolled up, revealing a tattoo of a crossed sword and Ankaran old military mark. The note beside him was scrawled in the same angular handwriting as the blackmail letters. The hidden truth will out. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The scene was staged. He was certain. The angle of the letter opener, the position of the bodiette, suggested a struggle. Yet the room was undisturbed. No books toppled. No chairs out of place. He stood, addressing the guests. This was no suicide. The Major was murdered, and the murderer is among us. A collective gasp filled the room. Angeline clutched Gideon's arm, her eyes wide. But why? Who would do this? That, mademoiselle, is what Hercule Poirot will discover, he said, his voice calm but firm. For now, no one touches anything. We are snowbound, and the truth, like the snow, will not be easily swept away. Poirot began his work, his mind a whirl of connections. The Major's coat, too large and muddy, suggested someone else had worn it, perhaps to mislead. The note echoed the blackmail letters, linking the murder to Angeline's fears. And the library itself, its heavy curtains, its locked windows, offered no easy exit. The killer had planned this, but Poirot knew even the cleverest plans left trace as he approached Archibald, who stood by the door, his face unreadable. Monsieur Sterling, you were the last to see the Major alive. When did he leave the dining room? Archibald's eyes flickered. He excused himself just before the dessert course, saying he needed air. I assumed he went to the library too. Smoke, and you saw no one else enter? Poirot pressed. No, monsieur, I was attending to the guests. Poirot nodded, filing the answer away. He turned to the guests, his gaze sweeping over them. I will speak with each of you in turn. For now, return to the drawing room. The little grey cells, they require order to work. As the guests filed out, their whispers filled with fear and suspicion, Poirot lingered in the library. He examined the floor, noting faint muddy footprints near the desk that led to a bookcase, and stopped abruptly. He pressed his fingers against the wood, searching for a mechanism, but found none. Still, the footprints intrigued him. They were small, not the Major's size, and the mud was fresh, as if someone had been outside in the storm. Back in the drawing room, the atmosphere was taut. Cassandra sat rigidly, her hands folded, while Gideon paced, his jaw tight. Zachariah stared into the fire, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand. Angeline sat close to her mother, her eyes red-rimmed. Rowana, dismissed from serving, hovered. Near the door, her expression unreadable. Poirot began his inquiries, starting with Angeline. In a private corner, she spoke softly, her voice trembling. I barely knew the Major, she said. He was a friend of my father's, invited out of courtesy. I don't understand why he'd be targeted. And the blackmail letters? Poirot asked. Did they mention him? No, but they mentioned a scandal tied to my family. I thought it was about money, but now, she trailed off, her eyes darting to the library. Poirot moved to Gideon, whose charm had given way to agitation. I didn't trust Hagen, he admitted. He was always asking questions about my family, my business. But murder, I don't know who'd gain from it. Zachariah was next, his voice low and halting. The Major and I served together years ago. He wasn't a good man. He made enemies. But I didn't kill him. His hands shook, and Poirot noted the sweat on his brow, the signs of a man haunted by more than grief. Rowana, questioned last, was evasive. I was in the kitchen all evening, she said. her eyes avoiding Poirot's. I saw nothing, but her fingers twisted in her apron, and Poirot sensed she was hiding something as the night wore on. The snow continued to fall, sealing the manor. In a cocoon of white, Poirot retired to his room, a small but elegant space overlooking the gardens, now buried under snow. He sat at a desk, sketching his first mind map, a web of names, motives, and clues. The Major's coat, the muddy footprints, the note, the blackmail letters all pointed to a carefully orchestrated crime, but the why eluded him. Was the blackmailer the killer, or had the Major himself been involved in the scheme? He thought. Of the manor, its secrets hidden in its walls, its history. The Van den Bosches were old money, their wealth tied to trade and land, but Angeline's letter had hinted at a darker past. The Major's tattoo, his South African stories perhaps. The answer lay there, in a history of war and betrayal. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Angeline, her face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, I found something," she whispered, holding out a small key. It was in the Major's coat pocket. I took it before anyone saw. Poirot took the key, its metal cold against his fingers. It was small, ornate, unlike the manor's standard keys. "Where does this lead, mademoiselle?" "I don't know," she said, "but I think it's important." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. A key, a hidden room, a murdered man. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture remained incomplete. "Return to your room, mademoiselle," he said, "and speak of this to no one." As she left, Poirot stared at the key, his little grey cells humming. The snowbound manor held its secrets tightly, but Hercule Poirot was not a man to be deterred by locks or storms. The truth, he knew, was waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 3. A shocking death. The grand dining hall of the Van den Bosch manor was ablaze with the soft glow of chandeliers, their crystal prisms scattering light across the polished mahogany table. The air was thick with the scent of roasted pheasant, mulled wine, and the faint undertone of wax from the candelabras. The engagement dinner for Angeline Van den Bosch and Gideon de Mere was in full swing. A carefully orchestrated affair meant to celebrate love, but now, strained by the undercurrent of secrets Poirot had sensed since his arrival. The snowstorm outside howled, sealing the manor's inhabitants in a cocoon of warmth and suspicion. Poirot, seated near the head of the table, observed the guests with his characteristic precision, his small, neat hands folded over the napkin in his lap, his moustache impeccably trimmed, and his eyes darting from face to face. Angel, radiant in a sapphire gown that matched her eyes, sat beside Gideon, whose angular features and dark, intense gaze betrayed a man accustomed to scrutiny. Across from them was Gideon's younger brother, Zachariah, whose nervous fidgeting with his fork suggested a mind ill at ease. Cassandra Van den Bosch, Angeline's mother, presided over the table with a regal air. Her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, though her tight smile hinted at unspoken burdens. The other guests, a mix of family, close friends, and a few enigmatic acquaintances, filled the room with polite chatter. But Poirot noted the forced laughter, the sidelong glances, and the occasional pause that lingered too long. Among them was Major Felix Hagen, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with a weathered face and a military bearing that commanded attention. His presence was an anomaly, Poirot thought. Angeline had introduced him as a family friend, but her hesitation when speaking his name suggested otherwise. The Major's booming voice and overly jovial demeanor seemed too great on the other guests, particularly Zachariah, who avoided his gaze. Poirot's little grey cells, as he called them, were already at work, piecing together the puzzle of the Major's role in this gathering. The dinner progressed through its courses: velouté soup, braised lamb, and delicate pastries, each dish served by the Manor's staff under the watchful eye of Archibald Sterling, the butler. Archibald moved with the precision of a metronome, his gaunt face expressionless as he directed the maids and footmen. Yet Poirot noticed a slight tremor in his hand as he poured wine for the Major, a detail that did not escape his scrutiny. As the dessert plates were cleared, the Major rose, glass in hand, to propose a toast. To Angeline and Gideon, he began, his voice carrying a trace of mockery. May their union be as enduring as the secrets this old manor holds. The room fell silent, the words hanging like a storm cloud. Angeline's smile faltered, and Gideon's hand tightened around his glass. Cassandra's eyes narrowed, but before anyone could respond, the Major chuckled, as if to dismiss the tension, and drained his wine. Poirot's gaze swept the room. Something was amiss. The Major's toast was no mere faux pas. It was a deliberate provocation. He leaned toward Angeline, who sat to his right, and murmured, "Mademoiselle, this Major Hogg in his presence here. It is curious, Nan. He is not, perhaps, as he seems." Angeline's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. "He's an old friend of my father's," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been kind to us, but I don't know him well." Her hesitation confirmed Poirot's suspicions. The Major was a piece of the puzzle, and Angeline was hiding something. The evening continued, with the guests retiring to the drawing room for coffee and liqueurs. Poirot lingered at the table, pretending to adjust his cufflinks, his eyes scanning the room for any overlooked detail. The snow outside had thickened, blanketing the manor in an eerie silence broken only by the crackle of the fireplaces. It was then that a piercing scream shattered the calm. The sound came from the library, a cavernous room adjacent to the dining hall, its walls lined with leather-bound volumes and portraits of stern-faced Van den Bosch's. Poirot was the first to reach the door, followed closely by Gideon and Archibald. Inside, sprawled across a Persian rug, lay Major Felix Hagen, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. A letter opener, its handle ornate with silver filigree, protruded from his chest. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the rug a dark crimson. "Mon Dieu," Poirot muttered, his voice calm but his mind racing. He knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. The Major's right hand clutched a crumpled piece of paper, and his coat curiously was misbuttoned, as if it had been hastily donned. The room was otherwise undisturbed, save for a single overturned chair and a faint smudge of mud near the window. Archibald, pale as the snow outside, stammered, "I'll fetch the doctor." But Poirot raised a hand. "Nan, Monsieur Sterling. The snow, it prevents all travel. We must preserve this scene exactly as it is. This is no accident, it is murder." The words sent a ripple of shock through the gathering crowd of guests, who had now clustered at the library's entrance. Angeline clutched Gideon's arm, her face ashen. Zachariah stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the Major's body. Cassandra's lips were pressed into a thin line, her composure unshaken but her eyes betraying a flicker of fear. Poirot's mind began to construct what he called his mind map, a mental framework of clues and connections. The letter opener was from the desk in the library, its blade clean except for the blood at its tip, suggesting a single, precise strike. The Major's coat, misbuttoned, was too large for his frame, as if it belonged to someone else. The mud near the window was fresh, yet the window was locked from the inside, and the snow outside showed no footprints. And then there was the crumpled paper in the Major's hand and note. Perhaps, or a clue to the killer's motive. Poirot stood, addressing the guests. Madame, et messieurs, a crime has been committed, and the murderer is among us. Until the snow clears and the authorities can be summoned, it is I, Hercule Poirot, who will uncover the truth. No one is to leave this manor, and no one is to touch this room. Gideon stepped forward, his voice sharp. You're saying one of us did this? That's absurd. The Major was difficult, but who would want him dead? Poirot's eyes twinkled with that familiar spark of insight. Monsieur Demire, the question is not who wanted him dead, but who had the opportunity and the motive. The Major's toast. It was no idle remark. He knew something dangerous, and someone ensured he would never speak it. The guests dispersed, their murmurs of fear and suspicion trailing behind them. Poirot remained in the library, his gaze sweeping over the scene. He approached the desk, where a decanter of brandy sat untouched, its stopper slightly askew. He lifted it, sniffing the contents, and noted a faint, bitter undertone that was not typical of fine brandy. Poison, perhaps, but the Major had been stabbed, not poisoned. The discrepancy intrigued him. He turned to the note in the Major's hand, carefully prying it open with a handkerchief to avoid smudging any fingerprints. The paper bore a single line in a hurried scrawl. The hidden truth lies in the shadow of the past. Cryptic, but to Poirot it was a beacon. The Major had been entangled in something deeper than a simple grudge, something tied to the manor, its history or its inhabitants. Archibald reappeared, his composure regained, but his eyes wary. Monsieur Poirot, shall I lock the library? To preserve the scene, as you said. Oui, Monsieur Sterling. But first, tell me, where were you when the scream was heard? I was in the kitchen, overseeing the staff, Archibald replied quickly. Too quickly, Poirot thought. I came as soon as I heard. And the Major, did you speak with him this evening? Only briefly, sir. He asked for more wine during dinner. He seemed agitated. Poirot nodded, dismissing the butler, but noting the slight hesitation in his voice. Archibald's role in the household gave him access to every room, every secret. Could he be the blackmailer Angeline had mentioned, or was he merely a pawn in a larger game? As the night deepened, Poirot returned to his guest room, a modest chamber overlooking the snow-covered gardens. He sat at the small writing desk, sketching his mind map in a notebook. At its center was the Major's death, with lines radiating to the guests, the staff, the blackmail letters, and the mysterious note. The coat, the mud, the locked window all pointed to a staged scene, a deliberate attempt to mislead. But why, and who? The snow continued to fall, sealing the manor in its icy grip. Poirot's thoughts turned to the Major's past, his connection to the Van den Bosch family, and the hidden truth hinted at in the note. Was this a crime of passion, revenge, or something more calculated? The answer, he knew, lay in the intricate web of relationships among the guests and in the secrets they guarded. Over the next few hours, Poirot moved through the manor, observing, questioning, and listening. He spoke with Angeline, who admitted the Major had visited the manor years ago, during her childhood, but claimed no deeper connection. Gideon, when pressed, revealed that the Major had once served with his father in South Africa, though he was vague about the details. Zachariah, still shaken, muttered something about the Major's dark deals, but refused to elaborate. And Cassandra, ever poised, deflected Poirot's questions with practiced ease, insisting the Major's death was a tragedy but not her concern. The staff, too, offered little clarity. Ruana, the maid, seemed nervous, her hands twisting in her apron as she described serving the Major his coffee. He was loud, sir, always laughing, but tonight he was different, like he was waiting for something. Her words lingered in Poirot's mind. Waiting for what, or whom? By midnight, the manor was quiet, save for the creak of floorboards and the howl of the wind. Poirot stood at his window, staring into the snow, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The Major's death was no random act, it was a carefully orchestrated move in a game of deception. The misbuttoned coat suggested someone had worn it, perhaps to impersonate the Major. The mud, with no footprints outside, implied the killer had entered and exited through the manor itself, and the noted's cryptic message pointed to a secret buried in the past, possibly tied to the blackmail letters Angeline had received. Poirot's mind map grew more complex, with threads connecting the Major's military history, the Van Den Bosch family, and the possibility of mistaken identity. Had the Major been mistaken for someone else, or had someone used his identity to confuse the scene? The letter opener, so conveniently placed, suggested a crime of opportunity. Yet the precision of the stab wound indicated planning, as he prepared for bed. Poirot made a mental note to examine the library again at first light. The answers, he was certain, lay in the details that overlooked the mundane, the seemingly insignificant. With his notebook tucked away and his mind still racing, he extinguished the lamp, the darkness mirroring the mystery that enveloped the manor. The next morning, Poirot returned to the library, the scene untouched as he had instructed. The snow had stopped, but the roads remained impassable, giving him time to work undisturbed. He examined the letter opener, noting its weight and the sharpness of its blade. It was not a weapon of choice, but one of convenience, suggesting that the killer had acted in the moment or wanted it to appear so. The mud smudge near the window drew his attention again. Kneeling, he studied its texture, fresh, damp, with a faint trace of grass. Yet the window was sealed, and the snow outside was pristine. He moved to the bookshelves, running his fingers along the spines, searching for anything out of place. A faint click under his touch revealed a hidden panel, but it was empty. Its contents, if any, long gone. The Major's body remained where it had fallen, now covered with a sheet at Poirot's request. He lifted the sheet, studying the coat. Once more, the misbuttoned front was not the only anomaly. The lining bore a faint monogram, not the Major's initials, but those of another G.D. Gideon Demire, or someone else entirely. Poirot stepped back, his mind map expanding. The coat, the mud, the note, the letter opener, all were pieces of a puzzle designed to mislead. The killer had staged the scene to suggest a suicide or an impulsive act, but Poirot saw through the ruse. This was a murder planned with care, its roots in a past the Major had threatened to expose. As the morning wore on, Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing-room, his demeanour calm but commanding. "Madame et messieurs," he began, "the death of Major Hagan was no accident, nor was it a simple crime of passion. It was a calculated act, designed to conceal a deeper truth. I ask you now to be truthful, for the murderer is among us, and the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot will not be deceived." The room was silent, the weight of his words settling over the guests like the snow outside. Angeline's eyes darted to Gideon, who stared at the floor. Zechariah's hands trembled, and Cassandra's composure faltered for the briefest moment. Archibald, standing by the door, shifted uncomfortably. Poirot continued, "The Major's coat, it was not his own. The mud near the window, it came from within the manor, and the note in his hand, it speaks of a hidden truth. I urge the guilty party to confess, for the truth, it cannot be hidden forever." No one spoke, but the tension was palpable. Poirot's eyes scanned the room, noting every reaction, every glance. The mind map in his head grew sharper, its lines converging on a single, inescapable conclusion. The Major's death was only the beginning. The true motive, the true killer, lay hidden in the shadows of the manor's past, a secret he was determined to uncover. The day unfolded with Poirot moving between rooms, questioning the staff and piecing together the fragments of the night. Before, he spoke with Ruana again, noting her unease when asked about the Major's coffee. "Did you notice anything unusual, mademoiselle? A taste, a smell?" She shook her head, but her eyes betrayed her. "No, sir, it was just coffee. I poured it from the pot, same as always. And the Major, did he speak to you before dinner?" "Only to complain about the cold," she said, her voice barely audible. "He said the manor felt like a tomb." Poirot filed this away, his suspicion growing. The coffee, the brandy, the letter opener, all were potential clues, but the coat and the mud were the keys. He returned to the library, examining the rug where the Major had fallen. A faint indentation caught his eye, barely visible beneath the bloodstain. It was the outline of a boot, smaller than the Major's, suggesting someone else had stood there, perhaps the killer, by afternoon. Poirot had interviewed every guest, their stories weaving a tapestry of half-truths and evasions. Gideon admitted to a falling out with the Major years ago over a business deal in South Africa. Zachariah hinted at the Major's involvement in something dishonest, but clammed up when pressed. Cassandra spoke of the Major as a distant acquaintance, yet her knowledge of his military service was oddly specific. Archibald, when questioned, again claimed to have been in the kitchen all evening, but a footman contradicted him, saying the butler had been absent for nearly 20 minutes before the scream. The discrepancy was small but significant, and Poirot added it to his mind map. As evening approached, the manor remained locked in its snowy prison, the tension among the guests growing unbearable. Poirot sat in the library, alone with the Majors. Bodie, his notebook open before him. The mind map now spanned several pages, with arrows connecting the coat to Gideon, the mud to the staff, and the note to a scandal buried in the family's past. The Major's toast, his cryptic note, and his staged death all pointed to one thing. He had known something dangerous, something worth killing for. Poirot closed his notebook, his eyes narrowing. The killer had made a mistake not in the act itself, but in the details. The coat was too large, the mud too fresh, the note too deliberate. This was no crime of passion, but a carefully laid trap designed to mislead and confuse. And yet Poirot thought the little grey cells were never misled for long. He rose, adjusting his tie, and made his way to the drawing-room, where the guests were gathered for tea. The atmosphere was strained, the clink of teacups the only sound. Breaking the silence, Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his presence commanding attention. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice steady. The murder of Major Felix Hagen was a crime of deception, a puzzle designed to obscure the truth. But the truth, it is like the snow, outside cold, unyielding, and impossible to hide forever. I have seen the clues, and they tell a story. The coat, it was worn by another. The mud, it came from within. And the note, it speaks of a secret that someone in this room cannot bear to have revealed. He paused, letting his words sink in. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to one another. Angeline clutched Gideon's hand, Zachariah stared at the floor, and Cassandra's teacup trembled in her hand. Archibald, standing by the door, Wasset took a step forward, his face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, you cannot mean," Poirot interrupted, "that the murderer is here, among us. And I, Hercule Poirot, will find them. But for now, we wait. The snow will clear, the authorities will come, and the truth will be revealed. Until then, I watch, I listen, and I think." The room was silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy. Poirot's mind map was far from complete, but its outlines were clear. The Major's death was the first thread in a tangled web of lies, and he was determined to unravel it, no matter how deep the secrets ran. The manor remained a fortress of secrets, its walls hiding truths that Poirot's little grey cells would soon bring to light. The snow might have trapped them, but it could not trap the truth. For Hercule Poirot, the game was only beginning. Chapter 4. The mind map begins. The snow continued to fall outside the Van den Bosch manor, blanketing the world in a silence that felt both serene and oppressive. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but tranquil. The discovery of Major Felix Hogan's body in the library had sent a ripple of shock through the gathered guests, their faces pale under the flickering light of the chandeliers. Hercule Poirot, however, remained a calm island in the storm, his sharp eyes darting from one person to another, cataloguing every nervous gesture, every whispered exchange. The little Belgian detective had already begun constructing his mental framework, what he called his mind map, to unravel the tangled threads of this perplexing case. The library, where the Major's body still lay, was cordoned off by Poirot's insistence. He had instructed Archibald Sterling, the butler, to ensure no one entered until the local authorities could be summoned. Though the snowstorm made their arrival unlikely for hours, if not days, the Major had been found slumped over the mahogany desk, a letter opener buried in his chest, his lifeless hand clutching a crumpled note. The scene had been staged to suggest suicide, but Poirot's keen observation had already dismissed that possibility. The angle of the wound, the absence of blood on the Major's fingers, and the peculiar placement of the letter opener all pointed to murder. But it was the note, with its cryptic phrase, "The hidden truth must stay buried," that intrigued Poirot most. It was a clue, yes, but also a challenge, and Poirot was not one to shy away from such provocations in the grand drawing-room. The guests had gathered, their unease palpable. Angeline van den Bosch sat near the fire, her delicate hands clasped tightly in her lap, her engagement ring glinting in the firelight. Her fiancé Gideon, demure, stood by her side, his dark eyes scanning the room as if searching for an unseen threat. His brother, Zachariah, leaned against a bookcase, his face drawn and pale, a glass of brandy trembling in his hand. The maid, Roanna, hovered near the doorway, her eyes darting nervously toward Archibald, who stood ramrod straight, his expression unreadable. Other guests, family friends, distant cousins, and a few acquaintances of questionable repute filled the room, their murmured conversations creating a low hum of tension. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his small stature belying the commanding presence he exuded. He adjusted his perfectly knotted tie and cleared his throat, drawing every eye to him. "Madame et messieurs," he began, his voice steady and precise, "we find ourselves in a most unfortunate situation. Major Felix Hagen is dead, and it is my belief, no, my certainty that he was murdered. Until the authorities arrive, it falls to Hercule Poirot to uncover the truth. And I assure you, the truth will be found, for it cannot hide from the little grey cells. A murmur rippled through the room, some guests exchanging uneasy glances, others staring at Poirot with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Voice broke the silence, soft but strained. "Monsieur Poirot, surely you don't think one of us—" She trailed off, her eyes wide with fear. Poirot raised a hand, silencing her gently. "Mademoiselle, I suspect everyone until the facts prove otherwise. The mind map, it begins now, and each of you will play a part in its construction. Let us start with the facts. The Major was found in the library at approximately 9 o'clock this evening during the engagement dinner. The letter opener, a most curious weapon, was not the sort one carries casually. It suggests premeditation, not impulse. And then there is the note. The hidden truth must stay buried. What truth, I wonder? And who was so determined to keep it buried that they resorted to murder?" He paused, letting his words settle over the room like the snow outside. His eyes moved to the Major's coat, which had been draped over a chair in the library. It was a heavy woolen garment, slightly too large for the Major's frame, and Poirot had noticed something peculiar about it. The sleeves were creased in a way that suggested someone else had worn it recently. He made a mental note to examine it further. Then there were the muddy footprints leading from the library to a side door, only to vanish abruptly in the snow outside. It was as if the murderer had intended to create a trail, only to abandon it halfway. A deliberate misdirection, perhaps, or a mistake born of panic. Poirot turned his attention to the guests, his mind already weaving connections. "Let us consider the Major himself," he continued. "A man with a past, Nan, a military man, yet his demeanor suggested secrets. Who among you knew him well? Mademoiselle Angeline, you invited him to this celebration. Why?" Angeline flushed, her fingers tightening around her handkerchief. He was a friend of my late father's," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They served together in the Boer War. I thought it only proper to invite him, given his connection to the family." "And yet," Poirot said, tilting his head, "you seemed surprised to see him when he arrived, almost as if you had not expected him to accept the invitation." Angeline's eyes flickered to Gideon, who placed a protective hand on her shoulder. I hadn't heard from him in years," she admitted. "His arrival was unexpected, yes, but I was glad to see him, or so I thought." Poirot nodded, filing away her hesitation. He turned to Gideon, whose jaw was set in a hard line. "Monsieur Demire, you and the Major exchanged words earlier this evening, did you not? I observed a certain tension between you." Gideon's eyes narrowed, but he answered smoothly. "We spoke briefly about old times, nothing more. The Major was not a man I knew well, but he seemed agitated tonight. I assumed it was the wine, or perhaps," Poirot said, his tone mild but probing, "it was something more personal. A disagreement, perhaps, from your shared past." Gideon's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Zachariah stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Leave my brother alone, Poirot. The Major was a troublemaker, always stirring up old grudges. If anyone had a reason to dislike him, it was half the people in this room." Poirot raised an eyebrow, intrigued by Zachariah's outburst. "And you, Monsieur Zachariah, did you have reason to dislike him?" Zachariah faltered, his bravado fading. "I barely knew him," he muttered, retreating to his brandy. Poirot's gaze shifted to Rowana, who stood silently by the door. "Mademoiselle Rowana, you were seen near the library earlier this evening. What were you doing there?" The maid's eyes widened, and she clutched her apron nervously. I was bringing fresh linens to the guest rooms, monsieur. I passed by the library, but I didn't go in. I swear it." Poirot noted the tremor in her voice, the way her eyes avoided his. "And yet," he said softly, "the linens in the guest rooms were already fresh. I checked. Curious, Nan." Rowana's face paled, but she said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. Archibald stepped forward, his tone deferential but firm. "Monsieur Poirot, Rowana is a diligent worker. She may have been mistaken about her tasks, but I assure you she is no murderer." Poirot smiled faintly. "Your loyalty is admirable, Monsieur Sterling. But loyalty can sometimes blind us to the truth. Tell me, where were you when the Major was killed?" Archibald stiffened. "I was in the dining room, attending to the guests. Several people can confirm this." "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone deceptively light. "And yet, the dining room is but a short walk from the library. A man as efficient as you could move quickly, could he not?" The butler's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent. Poirot turned back to the group, his voice rising slightly. "Each of you has a piece of this puzzle, whether you know it or not. The Major's death is no isolated event, is tied to the blackmail letters Mademoiselle Angeline received, to the secrets of this house, and perhaps to a case of mistaken identity. I will find the connections, and I will uncover the truth." Over the next few hours, Poirot moved methodically through the manor, his mind map growing more intricate with each discovery. He returned to the library, where he examined the Major's coat more closely. The creases in the sleeves were indeed unusual, and a faint scent of tobacco lingered on the fabric knot, the Major's brand. Poirot noted, recalling the cigarettes the Major had smoked earlier. Someone else had worn this coat, perhaps to impersonate him, to be seen in his place. But why? To create an alibi, to mislead a witness. The muddy footprints were another curiosity. Poirot followed their path from the library to the side door, where they stopped abruptly. He crouched down, his gloved fingers brushing the floor. The mud was fresh, but the prints were uneven, as if the person had been wearing boots too large for their feet. Another deliberate clue, or a careless mistake. Poirot's mind hummed with possibilities. He turned his attention to the note found in the Major's pocket. The handwriting was neat but unremarkable, the paper torn from a common notepad. The hidden truth must stay buried. The phrase suggested a secret so dangerous that someone was willing to kill to protect it. Was it tied to the blackmail letters Angeline had mentioned? She had shown Poirot one of the letters earlier, in private. It demanded a large sum of money to keep the family's shame hidden. The handwriting on the blackmail letter was different from the note in the Major's pocket, suggesting multiple players in this game, more a single player skilled at deception. Poirot's next stop was the Major's room, where he found a locked suitcase under the bed. With Archibald's reluctant assistance, he opened it, revealing a collection of old military medals, a faded photograph of a young woman, and a journal filled with cryptic entries. One entry, dated a month prior, caught Poirot's eye. The truth about Bruges must never come out. If they know, it will ruin everything. The Major had known something worth killing for, but what? As the night wore on, Poirot interviewed each guest and staff member. His questions, sharp but polite, designed to probe without accusing outright. Angeline admitted to receiving 3 blackmail letters over the past month, each more threatening than the last. She had kept them secret from Gideon, fearing it would jeopardize their engagement. Gideon, in turn, revealed that he and the Major had crossed paths during the Boer War, though he refused to elaborate, claiming it was ancient history. Zachariah's story was less consistent. He claimed to have been in his room during the murder, but a footman reported seeing him near the library at the crucial time. Rowanna's alibi remained shaky, and Poirot noticed her hands trembling whenever the Major's name was mentioned. Archibald, the butler, was a study in composure, but Poirot sensed a guardedness in his answers. He claimed to have been in the dining room all evening, yet no one could recall seeing him for a full half-hour during the dinner. When pressed, Archibald grew defensive, insisting he had been attending to duties. Poirot made a note to investigate the butler's background. Further, a man so devoted to the family might have reasons to protect its secrets, reasons that could lead to murder. By midnight, Poirot retreated to a quiet corner of the Manor's study, where he began sketching his mind map on a sheet of paper. At the center was Major Felix Hagen, his name circled in black ink. Radiating from it were lines connecting to the other players: Angeline, Gideon, Zachariah, Rowanna, Archibald, and a handful of other guests whose motives were still unclear. Beside each name, Poirot jotted down their secrets, their inconsistencies, their possible connections to the Major. The coat, the footprints, the note, the blackmail letters, all were added to the map, their relationships marked with question marks and arrows. The phrase mistaken identity kept circling in Poirot's mind. The Major's coat, too large for him, suggested someone had worn it to be mistaken for him. The footprints, too large for their wearer, pointed to a similar deception. Was the murderer trying to frame someone else? Or was the Major himself not what he seemed? Poirot recalled a passing comment from Angeline about the Major's unexpected arrival. Had someone invited him under false pretenses, knowing it would lead to conflict? As he worked, Poirot's thoughts turned to the Manor itself. The Van Den Bosch family had a long history in Bruges, their wealth built on trade and discreet dealings during the war. Angeline's mother, Cassandra, had been notably absent during the evening's chaos, claiming a headache. Poirot made a mental note to speak with her tomorrow. If anyone knew the family's secrets, it would be her. The clock struck 1 in the morning, and Poirot leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the mind map. It was incomplete, but it was a start. The connections were there, waiting to be uncovered. The Major's death was no random act, it was the culmination of a web of lies, secrets, and betrayals. And somewhere in that web was the truth, hidden but not buried, not yet. Poirot rose, folding the mind map carefully and tucking it into his pocket. He would sleep little tonight, he knew. The little grey cells were at work, and they would not rest until the puzzle was solved. As he stepped into the darkened hallway, the Manor seemed to hold its breath, its secrets whispering in the shadows. Hercule Poirot smiled faintly. The game had only just begun. Chapter 5. Interrogating the guests. The snow fell relentlessly outside the Van Den Bosch Manor, blanketing the world in a suffocating silence that mirrored the tension within. Hercule Poirot stood by the tall windows of the drawing-room, his small, precise hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the swirling flakes as if they might whisper secrets. The Manor, with its creaking floors and flickering gas lamps, felt like a stage set for a tragedy, and Poirot, ever the director, was ready to unravel the script. The engagement dinner had ended in chaos, with Major Felix Hogan's lifeless body. Discovered in the library, a letter opener buried in his chest. The staged suicide attempt, a clumsy one, Poirot noted had failed to deceive him. The murderer's hand was evident in the misplaced coat, the muddy footprints that led to a dead end, and the cryptic note clutched in the Major's hand. The hidden truth will bury you. Poirot's mind map, a mental lattice of connections, was already forming, but it needed the raw material of human testimony to grow. He had summoned the key players, Gillian van den Bosch, Gideon Demir, Zachariah Demir, and the maid, Rahona, to the drawing room for questioning. Each held a piece of the puzzle, and Poirot intended to fit them together with surgical precision. The room was heavy with the scent of polished wood and wax, the fire crackling in the hearth casting long shadows across the ornate rugs. Ang sat rigidly on a velvet settee, her pale hands folded in her lap, her engagement ring glinting like a small, defiant star. Gideon stood by her side, his broad shoulders squared but his dark eyes restless, darting toward the door as if expecting an escape. Zachariah, his younger brother, slouched in an armchair, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the armrest, his face pale and drawn. Rowana, the maid, stood near the back, her apron pristine but her eyes red-rimmed, as if she had been crying or pretending to. Poirot turned from the window, his mustache perfectly symmetrical, his posture impeccable despite the late hour. Madame et messieurs, he began, his voice soft but commanding, we are in the presence of a crime most foul. Major Felix Hagen is dead, and the hand that struck him down is among us. I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover the truth, but I require your cooperation. Each of you will speak, and each word will be weighed with care. Angeline's blue eyes met his, steady but guarded. Monsieur Poirot, I assure you, I had no reason to harm the Major. He was an acquaintance, nothing more. Poirot tilted his head, his gaze piercing. An acquaintance, Mademoiselle van den Bosch. Yet you invited him to your engagement party, a man with, how shall we say, a past most murky. Why? She hesitated, her fingers tightening around each other. He was a friend of my late father's, from their time in South Africa. I thought it proper to include him. Proper, Poirot repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. And yet, you received blackmail letters threatening your engagement to Monsieur Demir. Did the Major know of these letters? And composure faltered, a faint flush creeping up her neck. I mentioned them to him, yes. He offered to help, to investigate discreetly. He said he had experience with such matters. Experience, Poirot mused, pacing slowly before the fire. And what, precisely, was the nature of this experience? Did he speak of his time in the Boer War, perhaps, or of secrets he uncovered in the colonies? Angeline shook her head too quickly. He said little, only that he knew men who dealt in shadows. Poirot's eyes flicked to Gideon, who had remained silent, his jaw tight. Monsieur Demir, you were the fiancé of Mademoiselle van den Bosch, yet you seem troubled. Did you know Major Hagen well? Gideon's voice was low, controlled. I met him a few times. He was intense, always asking questions about my family, my business. I didn't trust him. Trust, Poirot said, stopping to face him. A delicate thing. And what of these questions? Were they about your past in South Africa, perhaps? Or about your brother, Monsieur's? Gideon's eyes narrowed, but he didn't glance at Zachariah. He asked about our trading business, Imports, exports. Nothing unusual. Nothing unusual, Poirot echoed, his voice a velvet blade. Yet a man is dead, and you, monsieur, are evasive. Tell me, did you see the Major last night, before he was found in the library? Gideon's hands clenched at his sides. I was with Angeline preparing for the dinner. I didn't see him. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to Zachariah, who had sunk deeper into his chair, his fingers now still. Monsieur Zachariah de Mere, you are a man of few words tonight, yet your eyes, they speak of fear. What did you know of Major Hagan? Zachariah's gaze darted to Gideon, then back to Poirot. He was a friend of our father's, from the war. I didn't know him well. He came to the manor uninvited sometimes, talking about old debts. Old debts, Poirot said, his voice sharp. And were these debts owed to him or by him? Speak plainly, monsieur. Zachariah swallowed, his voice trembling. I don't know, he was angry, always. I saw him arguing with the butler, Archibald, yesterday. Something about papers. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. Papers. Most interesting. And where were you, monsieur, when the Major was killed? Was in my room, Zachariah said quickly. I wasn't feeling well. The storm, it unsettles me. Poirot's gaze lingered on him, noting the sheen of sweat on his brow, the faint tremor in his hands. Shell shock, perhaps, from the war or guilt. He turned to Rowana, who stood like a statue, her eyes fixed on the floor. Mademoiselle Rowana, Poirot said gently, you are the maid, yet you see much, naine. Where were you when Major Hagan met his end? Rowana's voice was barely audible. I was in the kitchen, monsieur, preparing the dessert trays. I didn't hear anything, Poirot stepped closer, his eyes softening but never wavering. And yet, your eyes are red, mademoiselle. Tears for the Major, or for something else. She flinched, her hands twisting in her apron. I was upset about the dinner. It was ruined. I didn't know the Major well. Poirot nodded, stepping back, his mind cataloguing every gesture, every hesitation. Mercy, mademoiselle. You may all sit, but know this. The truth, it hides in the smallest details. I will find it. The guests returned to their seats, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Poirot paced again, his mind racing. Angeline. Denial of closeness with the Major contradicted her invitation to him. Gideon's evasiveness suggested a deeper connection to the victim. Zachariah's fear hinted at a past he wished to conceal. And Rowana, her alibi was too perfect, her tears too convenient. A mistaken identity was emerging, not just in the murder, but in the relationships that bound these people to the Major. He paused by the fireplace, his fingers brushing the mantel where a small photograph sat, a family portrait of the Van Den Bosch's, Angeline's parents, smiling stiffly, a younger Angeline between them. Something about it nagged at him, a detail out of place. He would return to it later. Monsieur Poirot, Angeline said, breaking the silence. Do you believe the blackmailer killed the Major? Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming. It is possible, mademoiselle, but the blackmailer's motive is not yet clear. Money, revenge, or perhaps something more personal. The Major's notes spoke of a hidden truth. I suspect it is the key to this puzzle. Gideon leaned forward, his voice sharp. Then why not focus on the staff? Archibald was arguing with the Major, and Rohanashi's always lurking. Listening, Rowana gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I did nothing, monsieur. I swear it. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. Accusations without evidence are but noise, Monsieur Demire. Let us consider the facts. The Major's coat was worn by someone else, too large for him, yet it fit perfectly on the body. The muddy footprints led to a wall, as if to confuse, and the note, it was placed, not dropped. These are not the acts of a panicked killer, but of one who planned. Zachariah shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding Poirot's. You think someone pretended to be the Major? Poirot's lips curved slightly. Precisement, monsieur. A mistaken identity, perhaps, to mislead us. But who would gain from such a deception? That is what I must discover. The fire crackled, a log splitting with a sharp pop. Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting the subtle glances exchanged between the guests. Angeline's hand rested on Gideon's arm, but her touch seemed more possessive than affectionate. Gideon's eyes flickered toward Zachariah, a silent warning. Zach stared at the floor, his fingers resuming their nervous tapping. Ruana stood apart, her posture rigid, her eyes darting to the door. Poirot's mind map expanded, threads connecting the Major's past to the blackmail letters, the Manor's secrets to the guests' lies. He needed more tangible evidence, not just words. The library, the scene of the crime, held clues he had yet to explore fully. The footprints, the coat, the note, they were pieces of a larger picture, one he would paint with precision. I will retire to the library, Poirot announced, adjusting his cuffs. There I will examine the scene again. You will remain here under the watch of Monsieur Archibald. Do not leave this room until I return. Angeline's voice was sharp. You suspect us all, don't you? Poirot smiled faintly. I suspect everyone, mademoiselle, until the truth reveals itself. The little grey cells, they do not rest. He left the drawing room, his footsteps echoing in the silent hall. The library was cold, the air heavy with the scent of old books and blood. The Major's body had been removed, but the chalk outline remained, a stark reminder of death. Poirot knelt by the desk where the letter opener had been found, his gloved fingers tracing the edge. The weapon was ornate, a Van den Bosch family heirloom, yet it had been left behind. A mistake, or a deliberate choice. He moved to the window, where the muddy footprints had ended abruptly. The snow outside was undisturbed, meaning the killer had not fled through the window. The footprints were a ruse, designed to mislead, but why? To suggest an outsider, or to point to someone specific? Poirot's eyes fell on the Major's coat, now draped over a chair. It was too large, the shoulders sagging, the sleeves too long. He lifted it, noting the faint scent of tobacco knot, the Major's brand, he recalled. Someone else had worn it, perhaps to impersonate him in the dark. But who and why? The note, too, intrigued him. The hidden truth will bury you. The handwriting was precise, almost feminine, yet it matched no sample he had seen. He tucked it into his pocket, his mind racing. The Major had enemies, but he also had secrets. South Africa, the Boer War, old debts, these were threads that needed pulling. As he examined the bookshelves, his fingers brushed a panel that felt off, a slight give, a faint click. He pressed harder, and the panel swung open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A hidden room, perhaps. His heart quickened, but he remained composed. This was no time for excitement, for clarity. He lit a small lantern from the desk and descended, the air growing colder, mustier. The room below was small, cluttered with old trunks and papers. A photograph lay atop one trunk, faded but Clear, Major Hagan, younger, standing beside a woman with sharp features and a secretive smile. Behind them, a sign read, Cape Town, 1899, the Boer War. The Major's past was here, in this room, and Poirot sensed it held the key to the murder. He sifted through the paper's letters, mostly written in a hurried hand. One caught his eye. Addressed to Cassandra, Angeline's mother. It spoke of a scandal, a child born out of wedlock, hidden to protect the family's name. The Major's name appeared again and again, linked to blackmail, betrayal, and a promise to reveal. All if not paid. Poirot's lips pursed. The Major had been no innocent victim. He had been a predator, preying on the Van den Bosch's secrets, but who had turned the hunter into the hunted, the blackmailer, or someone protecting the family. Poirot's mind. Map grew denser, connections forming between the Major, the manor, and the guests. The mistaken identity was no accident, it was the heart of the crime. He returned to the library, the photograph and letter tucked into his coat. The drawing room awaited, and with it, the next act of this drama. He would confront the guests. Again, but now with new questions. Who was the woman in the photograph? What was the scandal that haunted the Van den Bosch's? And why had the Major's coat been worn by another? As he re-entered the drawing room, the guests looked up. There, faces a mix of fear and defiance. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Mies, Amos," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "We have only begun to uncover the truth. Let us speak again, and this time, let no secret remain hidden." The fire crackled, the snow fell, and Hercule Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, weaving a net that would soon ensnare a killer. Chapter 5. Interrogating the guests, the snow fell relentlessly outside the Van den Bosch manor, blanketing the world in a suffocating silence that mirrored the tension within. Hercule Poirot stood by the tall windows of the drawing room, his small, precise hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the swirling flakes as if they might whisper secrets. The manor, with its creaking floors and flickering gas lamps, felt like a stage set for a tragedy, and Poirot, ever the director, was ready to unravel the script. The engagement dinner had ended in chaos, with Major Felix Hogan's lifeless body. Discovered in the library, a letter opener buried in his chest. The staged suicide attempt, a clumsy one, Poirot noted had failed to deceive him. The murderer's hand was evident in the misplaced coat, the muddy footprints that led to a dead end, and the cryptic note clutched in the Major's hand. "The hidden truth will bury you." Poirot's mind map, a mental lattice of connections, was already forming, but it needed the raw material of human testimony to grow. He had summoned the key players, Gillen Van den Bosch, Gideon Demir, Zachariah Demir, and the maid, Rahona, to the drawing room for questioning. Each held a piece of the puzzle, and Poirot intended to fit them together with surgical precision. The room was heavy with the scent of polished wood and wax, the fire crackling in the hearth casting long shadows across the ornate rugs. Ang sat rigidly on a velvet settee, her pale hands folded in her lap, her engagement ring glinting like a small, defiant star. Gideon stood by her side, his broad shoulders squared but his dark eyes restless, darting toward the door as if expecting an escape. Zachariah, his younger brother, slouched in an armchair, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the armrest, his face pale and drawn. Rowana, the maid, stood near the back, her apron pristine but her eyes red-rimmed, as if she had been crying or pretending to. Poirot turned from the window, his mustache perfectly symmetrical, his posture impeccable despite the late hour. "Madame et messieurs," he began, his voice soft but commanding, "we are in the presence of a crime most foul. Major Felix Hagen is dead, and the hand that struck him down is among us. I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover the truth, but I require your cooperation. Each of you will speak, and each word will be weighed with care." Angeline's blue eyes met his, steady but guarded. "Monsieur Poirot, I assure you, I had no reason to harm the Major. He was an acquaintance, nothing more." Poirot tilted his head, his gaze piercing. "An acquaintance, Mademoiselle Van den Bosch. Yet you invited him to your engagement party, a man with, how shall we say, a past most murky. Why?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around each other. He was a friend of my late father's, from their time in South Africa. I thought it proper to include him." "Proper," Poirot repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. "And yet, you received blackmail letters threatening your engagement to Monsieur Demire. Did the Major know of these letters?" And composure faltered, a faint flush creeping up her neck. I mentioned them to him, yes. He offered to help, to investigate discreetly. He said he had experience with such matters." "Experience," Poirot mused, pacing slowly before the fire. "And what, precisely, was the nature of this experience? Did he speak of his time in the Boer War, perhaps, or of secrets he uncovered in the colonies?" Angeline shook her head too quickly. "He said little, only that he knew men who dealt in shadows." Poirot's eyes flicked to Gideon, who had remained silent, his jaw tight. "Monsieur Demire, you were the fiancé of Mademoiselle Van den Bosch, yet you seem troubled. Did you know Major Hagen well?" Gideon's voice was low, controlled. "I met him a few times. He was intense, always asking questions about my family, my business. I didn't trust him." "Trust," Poirot said, stopping to face him. "A delicate thing. And what of these questions? Were they about your past in South Africa, perhaps? Or about your brother, Monsieur's?" Gideon's eyes narrowed, but he didn't glance at Zachariah. "He asked about our trading business, imports, exports." "Nothing unusual, nothing unusual," Poirot echoed, his voice a velvet blade. "Yet a man is dead, and you, monsieur, are evasive. Tell me, did you see the Major last night, before he was found in the library?" Gideon's hands clenched at his sides. "I was with Angeline preparing for the dinner. I didn't see him." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to Zachariah, who had sunk deeper into his chair, his fingers now still. "Monsieur Zachariah Demire, you are a man of few words tonight, yet your eyes, they speak of fear. What did you know of Major Hagen?" Zachariah's gaze darted to Gideon, then back to Poirot. He was a friend of our father's, from the war. I didn't know him well. He came to the manor uninvited sometimes, talking about old debts." "Old debts," Poirot said, his voice sharp. "And were these debts owed to him or by him? Speak plainly, monsieur." Zachariah swallowed, his voice trembling. "I don't know. He was angry, always. I saw him arguing with the butler, Archibald, yesterday. Something about papers." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "Papers. Most interesting. And where were you, monsieur, when the Major was killed?" "Was in my room," Zachariah said quickly. I wasn't feeling well. The storm, it unsettles me." Poirot's gaze lingered on him, noting the sheen of sweat on his brow, the faint tremor in his hands. shell shock perhaps, from the war, or guilt. He turned to Rowana, who stood like a statue, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Mademoiselle Rowana," Poirot said gently, "you are the maid, yet you see much, naine. Where were you when Major Hagan met his end?" Rowana's voice was barely audible. "I was in the kitchen, monsieur, preparing the dessert trays. I didn't hear anything." Poirot stepped closer, his eyes softening but never wavering. "And yet your eyes are red, mademoiselle. Tears for the Major, or for something else?" She flinched, her hands twisting in her apron. I was upset about the dinner. It was ruined. I didn't know the Major well." Poirot nodded, stepping back, his mind cataloguing every gesture, every hesitation. "Mercy, mademoiselle. You may all sit, but know this. The truth, it hides in the smallest details. I will find it." The guests returned to their seats, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Poirot paced again, his mind racing. Angeline. Denial of closeness with the Major contradicted her invitation to him. Gideon's evasiveness suggested a deeper connection to the victim. Zachariah's fear hinted at a past he wished to conceal. And Rowana, her alibi was too perfect, her tears too convenient. A mistaken identity was emerging, not just in the murder, but in the relationships that bound these people to the Major. He paused by the fireplace, his fingers brushing the mantel where a small photograph sat, a family portrait of the Van Den Bosch's, Angeline's parents, smiling stiffly, a younger Angeline between them. Something about it nagged at him, a detail out of place. He would return to it later. "Monsieur Poirot," Angeline said, breaking the silence, "do you believe the blackmailer killed the Major?" Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming. "It is possible, mademoiselle, but the blackmailer's motive is not yet clear. Money, revenge, or perhaps something more personal. The Major's notes spoke of a hidden truth. I suspect it is the key to this puzzle." Gideon leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Then why not focus on the staff? Archibald was arguing with the Major, and Rohanashi's always lurking." Listening, Rowana gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I did nothing, monsieur. I swear it." Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. "Accusations without evidence are but noise, Monsieur Demire. Let us consider the facts. The Major's coat was worn by someone else, too large for him, yet it fit perfectly on the body. The muddy footprints led to a wall, as if to confuse, and the note, it was placed, not dropped. These are not the acts of a panicked killer, but of one who planned." Zachariah shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding Poirot's. "You think someone pretended to be the Major?" Poirot held up the photograph. "This woman, she is known to someone here, none. And the letters, they speak of a scandal, a betrayal from the Boer War, a truth that threatens this family, this manor, this engagement." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The Major, he was not who he seemed. His death was no suicide, but a murder to protect her, to expose this hidden truth. The room erupted in murmurs, accusations, and denials. Archibald claimed ignorance of the room, though his eyes darted to the bookshelf. Rowana stammered, insisting she only cleaned where told. Zachariah's voice cracked as he swore he had no part in the Major's schemes. Cassandra, however, said nothing, her silence louder than any protest. Poirot continued, detailing the clues, the coat, the footprints, the note. He described the hidden room, the letters, the will, and the photograph, watching each face for a reaction. Gideon's jaw tightened, as though bracing for a blow. Angeline's eyes filled with tears, her dreams of a peaceful engagement unraveling. The truth, Poirot knew, was close, but the web of lies was thick, and the killer or killers still walked among them. Over the next hours, Poirot questioned each suspect privately, cross-referencing their stories against his mind map. Archibald admitted to knowing of the room but claimed he hadn't entered it in years. His phone call, he insisted, was a mistake, not a cover-up. Rowana confessed to overhearing a conversation between the Major and an unknown man, but fear had kept her silent. Zachariah spoke of the Major's cruelty during their time in South Africa, a grudge that lingered but, he swore, did not lead to murder. Cassandra, when pressed, admitted to paying a blackmailer years ago to protect her family's reputation, but denied any recent involvement. The clues pointed in multiple directions. But Poirot's focus returned to the hidden room. He revisited it that afternoon, searching for anything overlooked. In a corner, half buried under dust, he found a small locket, its clasp broken. Inside was a miniature of the woman from the photograph lease, perhaps the key to the scandal. The locket's presence suggested someone had been in the room recently, someone careless enough to leave it behind. Poirot pocketed it, his mind map shifting once more. By evening, the snow had slowed, but the manor remained a pressure cooker of suspicion. Poirot gathered the household again, this time with a new theory. The Major, he said, he played a dangerous game, posing as a victim of blackmail to ruin Mademoiselle Angeline's happiness. But he was not alone. An accomplice, someone, in this room, turned against him, and the knife found its mark. He held up the locket, watching as Cassandra's face drained of color. It belongs to the woman in the photograph, Nen. A woman tied to the Van den Bosch legacy, a secret you would kill to keep. The accusation hung in the air, and the truth began to unravel, thread by thread, as Poirot's little grey cells worked their magic in the snowbound manor. Chapter 7. The blackmailer's motive. The snow continued to fall outside the Van den Bosch manor, blanketing the world in a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to mirror the tension within. Hercule Poirot sat in the dimly lit study, a small fire crackling in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls. His notebook lay open before him, its pages filled with the intricate lines and annotations of his mind mapper, tool that to the untrained eye might appear chaotic, but to Poirot was a masterpiece of order, each line a thread in the tapestry of truth he was weaving. The events of the past day weighed heavily on him. Major Felix Hogan's death in the library, staged to look like a suicide but betrayed by subtle inconsistencies, had set the household on edge. The guests, trapped by the snowstorm, eyed one another with suspicion, their polite facades crumbling under the pressure of Poirot's relentless inquiries. The discovery of the secret room behind the library, with its trove of old letters and a photograph linking the Major to an unknown woman, had only deepened the mystery. And now, as Poirot traced the lines of his mind map, a new hypothesis was forming, one that suggested the blackmailer's motives were not as simple as they first appeared. Poirot's pen paused over a name: Archibald Sterling, the butler. The man's impeccable manners and unflappable demeanor had initially seemed above reproach, but Poirot had learned long ago that appearances were often the most deceptive part of any case. Archibald's behavior during the investigation had raised subtle red flags, slight hesitation when questioned about his whereabouts during the engagement dinner, a carefully worded response about the Major's arrival at the manor, and, most tellingly, a staged telephone call Poirot had overheard. Earlier that morning, The call had been a curious affair. Poirot, passing by the small alcove near the manor's entrance hall, had caught the tail end of Archibald's conversation. The butler's voice, usually steady and measured, had carried a note of urgency. "Yes, I understand," Archibald had said, his tone low but distinct. "It will be handled as planned. No one suspects." The line had gone dead shortly after, and when Poirot had casually inquired about the call, Archibald had dismissed it as a routine check-in with a supplier delayed by the snow. But Poirot's instincts told him otherwise. The call had been too deliberate, too staged, as if Archibald had wanted someone to overhear just enough to divert suspicion. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he considered the implications. The blackmailer, whoever they were, had been tormenting Angeline van den Bosch, with letters threatening to expose a secret that could ruin her engagement to Gideon Demire. The demands had been vague money, initially, but the letters hinted at something more, something tied to the manor itself. Could it be, Poirot mused, that the blackmailer's true aim was not financial gain, but something far more valuable? The manor, with its centuries-old history and hidden secrets, was a prize in itself, and who better to know its secrets than the butler, a man who had served the Van den Bosch family for decades? The door to the study creaked open, interrupting Poirot's thoughts. Angeline van den Bosch stepped inside, her face pale but composed. She wore a simple wool dress, its dark green hue accentuating the exhaustion in her eyes. In her hands, she clutched a small bundle of papers, their edges yellowed with age. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling faintly, "I found these in my mother's study. I think they might be important." Poirot rose, his movements precise and deliberate, and gestured for her to sit. "Mademoiselle, you have done well to bring these to me. May I see them?" Angeline hesitated, then handed him the papers. They were letters, written in a flowing, elegant script that suggested an earlier era. Poirot's eyes scanned the first page, and his heart quickened. The letters were addressed to Cassandra van den Bosch, Angeline's mother, and dated nearly 20 years ago. They spoke of a scandalous secret payment made to an unnamed individual to keep silent about an event tied to the family's past. The language was cryptic, but one phrase stood out: the truth of the manor must remain buried. Poirot's mind raced. The manor, the phrase echoed the cryptic note found in Major Hogan's pocket, the one that mentioned a hidden truth. Could these letters be connected to the blackmailer's demands? And if so, how did Archibald fit into the puzzle? "These are most illuminating," Mademoiselle Poirot said, his tone calm but his eyes sharp. "Tell me, do you know of any reason why your mother might have kept such letters hidden?" Angeline shook her head, her fingers twisting nervously. In her lap, Mother never speaks of the past. She's always been private. But I know she's been worried lately. She's been short-tempered, distracted. I thought it was because of my engagement, but now I'm not so sure." Poirot nodded, his mind already connecting the dots. Cassandra van den Bosch, a woman of poise and authority, had admitted to paying off a blackmailer years ago. Could she be facing the same threat again? Or was she, perhaps, more deeply involved than she had let on? "Mercy, mademoiselle," Poirot said, folding the letters carefully. "You have given me much to consider. I would ask that you speak of this to no one, not even your fiancé. The truth, it is close, but it is delicate, and we must tread carefully." Angeline nodded, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension, and left the study. Poirot returned to his mind map, adding a new branch labeled Cassandra's Secret. The letters suggested a scandal tied to the Manors, history possibly linked to the Boer War, given the photograph of the Major with an unknown woman. But what was the nature of this scandal, and why was it resurfacing now? The day passed in a blur of interviews and observations. Poirot moved through the manor with the precision of a chess master, questioning guests and staff while noting every detail. The way Gideon Demire avoided eye contact when asked about his brother Zachariah, the nervous tick in Roanna, the maid's hand when she spoke of the night of the murder, the faint scent of tobacco that lingered in the library where the Major had died. Each piece of information was a fragment of the puzzle, and Poirot's mind map grew ever more complex. By evening, the snow had slowed, but the manor remained isolated, its inhabitants bound by suspicion and fear. Poirot gathered the key players in the drawing room for what he called an informal discussion. In truth, it was a carefully orchestrated performance, designed to unsettle the guilty and elicit reactions that might betray their secrets. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, standing before the fireplace, his small frame commanding the room's attention, "we find ourselves in a most unfortunate situation. A man is dead, and the truth of his demise is obscured by a web of lies. But fear not, Hercule Poirot is not so easily deceived. The clues, they speak, and they point to a motive that is not what it seems." The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Gideon, seated beside Angeline, clenched his jaw. Zachariah, his brother, stared at the floor, his hands trembling. Slightly, Cassandra van den Bosch, regal in a high-necked gown, fixed Poirot with a steely gaze. Archibald stood by the door, his expression unreadable but his posture stiff. Poirot continued, his voice measured but piercing. "The blackmailer who threatened Mademoiselle Angeline's happiness is no ordinary extortionist. Their demands, they are not merely for money. Nan, they seek something greater, the manor itself and the secrets it holds. And I believe one among us knows more than they have admitted." A murmur rippled through the room. Cassandra's lips tightened, and Archibald's eyes flickered briefly toward her before returning to Poirot. It was a small gesture, but it did not escape the detective's notice. "Let us consider the facts," Poirot said, pacing slowly. "Major Hagan, he was not what he seemed. His coat, it was worn by another on the night of his death, deliberate act to confuse. The muddy footprints in the library, they led nowhere, as if the murderer wished to mislead us. And the note in the Major's pocket, it spoke of a hidden truth. But what is this truth, and who seeks to keep it buried?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then, to everyone's surprise, Archibald stepped forward. "If I may." "Monsieur Poirot," the butler said, his voice steady but tinged with something Poirot could not quite place, defiance, perhaps, or fear. "I believe you are mistaken. The Major's death was a tragedy, but to suggest it is tied to some grand conspiracy about the manor is fanciful." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of amusement or irritation none could tell. "Fanciful, you say? Yet it was you, Monsieur Sterling, who received a most curious telephone call this morning, a call that spoke of plans and secrecy. Would you care to explain?" Archibald's face remained impassive, but his hands clenched briefly at his sides. "As I told you, it was a supplier. Nothing more." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild, "but the little grey cells, they do not rest. They tell me that you know more of this manor's secrets than you let on. And I wonder, monsieur, if those secrets are worth killing for. The accusation hung in the air, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Cassandra rose, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "This is absurd, Monsieur Poirot. Archibald has served this family faithfully for years. To accuse him without evidence is an outrage." Poirot turned to her, his eyes gleaming. "Evidence, madame. It is there, in the shadows of this house, in the letters you hid, in the lies that have been told. The truth, it will not remain hidden, for long." The room erupted in whispers, and Poirot knew he had struck a nerve. The blackmailer's motive was tied to the manor, to its history, to the secrets buried in its walls. And Archibald, with his staged call and guarded demeanor, was at the heart of it. But was he the mastermind, or merely a pawn in a larger game? As the evening drew to a close, Poirot returned to his study, his mind map now a sprawling web of connections. He added a new note, Archibald Key, to the manor's secrets. The butler's role was becoming clearer, but the full truth remained elusive. The letters from Cassandra's past, the photograph in the hidden room, the staged call, they all pointed to a conspiracy that went beyond mere greed. The manor itself was the prize, and someone was willing to kill to claim it. Poirot closed, his notebook, his mind alight with possibilities. The snow might have trapped them all in this house, but it had also given him time to unravel the lies, to expose the hidden truth. And as he gazed out at the snow-covered grounds, he knew that the next day would bring new revelations, new pieces to the puzzle. The blackmailer's motive was within his grasp, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until he had seized it. The fire burned low, and the manor settled into an uneasy silence. But for Poirot, the night was far from over. The little grey cells were at work, and the truth, it was closer than ever. Chapter 8. The Family's Secrets. The snow continued to blanket the Van den Bosch manor, its relentless fall muffling the world outside and sealing the guests within the grand, creaking house. Hercule Poirot stood by a tall window in the drawing room, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes scanning the white expanse beyond. The storm had not abated, and the manor felt more like a prison with each passing hour. The deaths of Major Felix Hagen and the maid, Ruana, weighed heavily on the air, their mysteries intertwining like the threads of a tapestry Poirot was determined to unravel. His mind, ever meticulous, churned through the clues, the Major's staged death, the cryptic note, the muddy footprints leading nowhere, and now the poisoned maid found in the pantry. The idea of mistaken identity pulsed at the heart of it all, a thread he could not yet fully grasp. Poirot turned from the window, his polished shoes clicking softly on the parquet floor as he crossed to the center of the room. The guests had dispersed after the grim discovery of Roana's body, their faces pale, their whispers sharp with fear and suspicion. Angeline van den Bosch, the young heiress whose engagement party had sparked this grim affair, had retired to her room, her fiancé Gideon Demire at her side. Gideon's brother Zachariah had been seen pacing the corridors, his eyes haunted, while the butler, Archibald Sterling, maintained his stoic facade, though Poirot had noted a flicker of unease in his movements. Cassandra van den Bosch, Angeline's formidable mother, had been the last to leave the dining room, her expression unreadable as she clutched a glass of untouched brandy. Poirot's mind map, as he called it, a mental construct of connections, motives, and contradictions, was growing ever more complex. He had pinned the Major's death to a staged suicide gone wrong, the letter opener driven into his chest by another's hand. Ruhana's poisoning suggested she had stumbled upon a truth too dangerous to keep. The secret room behind the library, with its trove of old letters and a photograph linking the Major to an unknown woman, had deepened the mystery. The letters hinted at a scandal from years past, possibly tied to the Boer War, and the photograph suggested a personal connection to someone in the manor, but it was the worn-out boots in Ruhana's room that gnawed at Poirot's thoughts. Why would a maid, with her modest means, possess boots so worn, and why had they been hidden beneath her bed? He sat at a small writing desk, pulling a sheet of paper from his pocket. Though his mind map existed primarily in his head, he occasionally jotted down key points to clarify his thoughts. In precise, elegant script, he wrote, Major's coat worn by another, muddy footprints, deliberate misdirection, Ruhana's boots impersonation, blackmail tied to Manor's ownership. He paused, tapping his pen against his lips. The blackmail letters Angeline had received demanded money but also hinted at exposing a hidden truth. Poirot suspected. The truth was not just personal but tied to the very walls of the manor itself. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Archibald entered, his silver tray bearing a cup of steaming tisane. Monsieur Poirot, your tea, he said, his voice as smooth as ever, though Poirot noted the slight tremor in his hand as he set the tray down. Mercy, Archibald, Poirot said, his eyes never leaving the butler's face. You have served the Van den Bosch family for many years, Nan. 23 years, sir, Archibald replied, straightening. Since Miss Cassandra was a young woman, and in all that time you must have seen many secrets come and go within these walls. Archibald, lips tightened, a fleeting crack in his composure. A butler's duty is to serve, not to pry, Monsieur Poirot. Natural man, Poirot said, smiling faintly. But a man of your observation cannot help but notice things. For example, the tensions between Monsieur Gideon and his brother, Zachariah. They are not, perhaps, as close as brothers should be. Archibald hesitated, then said, They have their differences, sir, as many siblings do. Poirot nodded, dismissing the butler with a wave. Archibald's reluctance to speak only confirmed Poirot's suspicion that the family's history held the key to the murders. He sipped his tisane, the warm herbal blend, soothing his senses as he turned his attention to the Demire brothers. The next morning, Poirot requested a private audience with Gideon and Zachariah in the manor's study. The room was lined with bookshelves, their leather-bound volumes untouched for years, and a fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the oak-panelled walls. Gideon, tall and broad-shouldered, stood by the fireplace, his dark eyes wary. Zachariah sat in a backed chair, his hands fidgeting, his face drawn. The contrast between the brothers was stark. Gideon exuded confidence, while Zachariah seemed to shrink into himself, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting an escape. Messieurs, Poirot began, pacing slowly before them. The deaths in this house are not random. They are tied to a history that you both share, Nan. A history that involves Major Felix Hagen. Gideon's jaw tightened. I told you, Poirot, I barely knew the man. He was a guest, nothing more. And yet, Poirot said, raising a finger, a photograph in the secret room shows you, Monsieur Gideon, and you, Monsieur Zachariah, with the Major in South Africa. You were younger, of course, but the resemblance is unmistakable. Tell me, what was your connection to him? Zachariah flinched, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. It was years ago, he muttered. During the Boer War, we were colleagues, of sorts. Colleagues. Poirot's tone was gentle but probing. Or perhaps something more. The Major was not a man of clean reputation, I think. The letters in the secret room speak of a scandal, of betrayals and debts unpaid. Were you entangled in his schemes? Gideon stepped forward, his voice sharp. That's enough, Poirot. The past is the past. Whatever happened in South Africa has no bearing on what's happening now. Poirot's moustache twitched. On the contrary, Monsieur Gideon, the past is very much alive in this house. The blackmail letters threatening Mademoiselle Angeline's engagement, they mention a hidden truth. I believe this truth is rooted in your shared history with the Major, and perhaps, he added, turning to Zachariah, in the pain it has caused you. Zachariah's eyes widened, and for a moment, Poirot thought he might bolt from the room. Instead, the younger brother slumped back, his voice barely a whisper. You don't understand. The Major, he ruined everything. Our family, our name. He used us, then discarded us when it suited him. Zachariah, be quiet. Gideon snapped, but Poirot raised a hand. Nan, let him speak. What did the Major do, Monsieur Zachariah? Zachariah's hands trembled as he spoke. He was our commanding officer during the war. He promised us wealth, a share in some dealings, smuggled goods, mostly. But when things went wrong, he blamed us. Our father lost everything because of him. I was young, but I remember the shame. Gideon swore we'd never speak of it again. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, the Major came to this house, invited, to an engagement party where you both were present. A coincidence, perhaps, or did someone invite him to settle old scores? Gideon's face darkened. I didn't invite him. Angeline said he was a friend of her mother's. Indeed, Poirot said, filing that detail away. And you, Monsieur Zachariah, did you wish to confront the Major? Zachariah shook his head, his voice breaking. I didn't want to see him. I couldn't face him. Poirot studied the brothers, noting Gideon's defensiveness and Zachariah's fragility. The photograph in the secret room had shown 3 men, Gideon, Zachariah, and the Major standing together in a dusty camp, their faces grim. But there was something else in Zachariah's eyes, a flicker of guilt that Poirot could not ignore. Later that afternoon, Poirot sought out Cassandra van den Bosch. The matriarch of the manor was in her private sitting room, a small, elegant space adorned with family portraits and a roaring fire. She sat in a velvet armchair, her silver hair pinned tightly, her posture regal despite the strain in her eyes. Poirot bowed slightly as he entered. Madame van den Bosch, he said, I must speak with you about a delicate matter. The Major, Felix Hoganhe, was no stranger to you, was he? Cassandra's fingers tightened around the armrests, but her voice remained steady. He was an acquaintance from years ago, Monsieur Poirot, nothing more. An acquaintance who appears in a photograph with your future son-in-law and his brother, Poirot said, his tone mild but unyielding, and whose presence in this house has led to murder. I ask you, madame, what was your connection to him? Cassandra's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, Poirot thought she would dismiss him, but then she sighed, her shoulders sagging. Slightly. Very well, she said. Felix Hagen was a mistake. Years ago, during the Boer War, he was involved in some dealings with my late husband. They were not entirely honorable, I admit. When the scandal broke, I paid to keep it quiet. I thought the matter was buried. Paid. Poirot's eyebrows rose. To whom, madame? To Felix, she said, her voice bitter. He was the one who threatened to expose us. I gave him money to leave Bruges, to leave us in peace. I thought he had. And yet he returned, Poirot said. Invited to your daughter's engagement. Party, why? Cassandra's eyes flickered with something fear, perhaps, or regret. I didn't invite him, I swear it. Angeline must have, or perhaps someone else did, to stir up trouble. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Cassandra's admission of paying off the Major suggested a deeper connection to the blackmail scheme. If she had paid him once, could she have been blackmailed again? And what of the manor itself? The blackmail letters had hinted at a motive beyond money, perhaps tied to the estate's ownership. Poirot recalled the old letters in the secret room, some mentioning a disputed inheritance, a child born out of wedlock who might claim the Van den Bosch fortune. Madame Poirot said, there is another matter. The maid, Roanna, she was poisoned because she knew too much. Did she know of your payments to the Major? Or perhaps of another secret, one tied to the manor itself? Cassandra's face paled, but she shook her head. I don't know what. Roanna knew. She was a quiet girl, always watching, always listening. If she discovered something, she never told me. Poirot inclined his head, sensing the half-truth in her words. Mercy, madame. But I warn you, the truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how deeply it is buried. As evening fell, Poirot returned to the secret room behind the library. Its narrow entrance hidden behind a sliding panel. The air was musty, the shelves lined with dusty ledgers and letters yellowed with age. He lit a candle, its flickering light casting shadows across the walls. The photograph of the Major, Gideon, and Zachariah lay on a small table alongside a pile of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Poirot untied the ribbon and began to read. The letters were a mix of personal correspondence and cryptic notes, some in the Major's hand, others unsigned. One, dated 15 years prior, caught his eye. The child must never know. The manor is yours, but only if the truth remains hidden. Another mentioned a woman named Elise, who had died in South Africa, leaving behind a son. The pieces began to align in Poirot's mind map: a scandal, a hidden heir, and a family desperate to protect its legacy. He turned to the photograph again, studying the faces. The Major's smirk, Gideon's stern gaze, Zachariah's nervous expression. But there was a fourth figure in the background, partially obscured, a woman with dark hair, her face turned away. Could she be Elise? Or someone else, someone still? In the manor, a creak behind him made Poirot spin around, his hand instinctively reaching for the candle. Archibald stood in the doorway, his face pale in the flickering light. Monsieur Poirot, he said, his voice strained, you shouldn't be here. And yet, here I am, Poirot said, his tone calm but firm. This room holds many secrets. Does it not, Archibald? Secrets you have helped to keep. The butler's eyes darted to the letters, then back to Poirot. I've done my duty, sir. That's all. Your duty, Poirot said, stepping closer, or your part in a conspiracy. The Major's coat was worn by someone else the night he died. The footprints were a clumsy attempt to mislead, and Roanna, her boots suggest she played a role in this charade. Tell me, Archibald, what do you know of the manor's hidden truth? Composure cracked, his hands clenching at his sides. I know nothing, Monsieur Poirot. I swear it. Then why? Poirot said, his voice soft but piercing. Do you tremble so? Archibald turned and fled, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Poirot did not pursue him. Instead, he returned to the letters, his mind racing. The butler's fear confirmed that the secrets of the manor were not just historical, but active. A living threat that had claimed to lives and might claim more. Over. The next day, Poirot pieced together more of the puzzle. He interviewed the remaining staff, noting their alibis and inconsistencies. The cook, a stout woman named Marta, claimed to have seen Rohanna arguing with Zachariah the night before her death, though she couldn't hear the words. The gardener, a gruff man named Peter, admitted to seeing the Major wandering the grounds, late at night, wearing a coat that seemed too large for him. Each detail added to Poirot's mind map, a web of connections that pointed to a tangled history of betrayal and revenge. He returned to Angeline, finding her in the conservatory, her face pale as she stared at the snow-covered gardens. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't know how much more of this I can bear. First the Major, now Rohanna. What is happening in my home?" Poirot took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Mademoiselle, the truth is close. But I must ask you something. The Major, was he truly a friend of your mother's, or did someone else invite him here?" Angeline frowned, her brow furrowing. I assumed it was Mother. She mentioned knowing him years ago, but now that you ask, I'm not sure. The invitation came through Archibald. He said it was on Mother's orders. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Archibald, again. "And tell me, mademoiselle, have you ever heard of a woman named Elise? Or of a child, perhaps, tied to your family's past?" Angeline shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, never." "What child? What are you saying?" Poirot patted her hand. "Patience, mademoiselle. The little grey cells, they work, and soon they will reveal all." That night, Poirot gathered his notes and sat by the fire in his room, his mind map nearly complete. The Major's death was no suicide, but a murder staged to look like one. Rohanna's poisoning suggested she had discovered the killer's identity, or the motive behind the blackmail. The photograph and letters pointed to a scandal in South Africa, a hidden heir, and a family desperate to protect its legacy. Gideon and Zachariah's feud with the Major provided a motive, but Cassandra's payments to him suggested she, too, had secrets to hide. And Archibald, his nervous behavior and knowledge of the manor's hidden passages made him a key figure. Perhaps even the linchpin. Poirot closed his eyes, letting the pieces fall into place. The mistaken identity was not just about the Major's coat or Rohanna's boots, but something deeper, a person whose true identity had been concealed for years. The manor itself was at stake, its ownership tied to a secret that someone was willing to kill to protect. As the fire crackled, Poirot's lips curved into a small smile. The truth was within his grasp, and soon he would confront the guilty in the drawing room, where all would be revealed. The following morning, Poirot requested a final meeting with Cassandra. She met him in the library, her face composed but her eyes wary. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "have you found the killer?" "I have found many things, madame," Poirot said, his voice grave, "including the truth about your payments to Felix Hagen. You paid him to keep silent about a scandal, yes. A scandal that involved a child, perhaps one who could claim this manor." Cassandra's face drained of colour. "How did you, the letters?" "Madame," Poirot said. "They speak of Elise, a woman who died in South Africa, and a son left behind. Is this son the hidden truth the blackmailer threatened to reveal?" Cassandra sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "Elise was my husband's sister. She had a child out of wedlock, a boy. We took him in, raised him as our own. But Felix knew, and he used it against us. I paid him to keep quiet, to protect Angeline's future. And this boy, Poirot said, his voice soft, where is he now? Cassandra's eyes filled with tears. He died years ago, or so I thought. But Felix claimed he was alive, that he could return and claim the manor. I didn't believe him, but I couldn't risk it. Poirot nodded, his mind map complete. The scandal of the hidden heir explained the blackmail, but not the murders. Someone in the manor had taken drastic steps to ensure the truth remained buried, and Poirot was certain that person was still among them. The chapter stretched on as Poirot continued his investigation, each conversation, each clue adding layers to the mystery. The snow began to lighten, but the manor remained a crucible of secrets, its inhabitants bound by fear and guilt. Poirot's mind map grew ever more intricate, connecting the Major's past to the present, the blackmail to the murders, and the mistaken identities to a truth that threatened to tear the Van den Bosch family apart. As he prepared for the final confrontation, he knew the killers would soon face the justice of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 9. The Family's Secrets. The snow continued to fall outside the Van den Bosch manor, cloaking the estate in an unrelenting shroud of white. Inside, the atmosphere was no less oppressive. The deaths of Major Felix Hagen and Ruana, the maid, had cast a pall over the engagement party, and the trapped guests moved through the grand halls with suspicion in their eyes. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the growing tension, sat in the library, his notebook open before him. His mind map, a sprawling web of names, motives, and clues, had grown more intricate with each revelation. The photograph he had found in the hidden room, a faded image of Major Hagen with an unknown woman, lay on the table, its edges curling slightly from age. Beside it were the cryptic letters, their references to a scandal during the Boer War tantalizingly vague. Poirot's mustache twitched as he considered the threads of the case, his little grey cells working tirelessly to unravel the knot of deception. The morning after Rohana's death, Poirot gathered the key players in the drawing room. Van den Bosch sat near the fireplace, her delicate hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her fiancé Gideon Demire stood by the window, his dark eyes scanning the snow-covered grounds as if searching for an escape. His younger brother Zachariah slouched in an armchair, his face pale and drawn, the weight of the recent tragedies etched into his features. Cassandra Van den Bosch, Angeline's mother, perched regally on a velvet settee, her composure a stark contrast to the nervous energy radiating from the others. Archibald Sterling, the butler, hovered near the door, his usual impeccable posture slightly stooped, as though the events of the past days had worn him down. Poirot cleared his throat, drawing all eyes to him. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice calm but commanding, "we find ourselves in a most perplexing situation. 2 deaths, a blackmail scheme, and a web of lies that threatens to suffocate us all. But fear not, Hercule Poirot does not rest until the truth is revealed. Today we shall explore the secrets of this family, for I believe the key to this mystery lies not in the present, but in the past." Angeline's eyes widened. "The past? What do you mean, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot raised a hand, silencing her gently. "All in good time, mademoiselle. First, I must ask you about your family's history. There are gaps, Nan. Things left unsaid, perhaps, about your time in South Africa." Cassandra's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Gideon shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering, to Zachariah, who seemed to shrink further into his chair. Poirot's sharp eyes missed none of this. He opened his notebook, flipping to a page where he had jotted down notes from the letters found in the hidden room. The Boer War, he said, tapping the page. A time of great turmoil, of secrets buried beneath the chaos of conflict. Major Hagen, I believe, was no stranger to this war. Nor, I suspect, were you, Monsieur Gideon, and you, Monsieur Zachariah. Gideon's jaw clenched. That was a long time ago, Poirot. What does it have to do with anything? Everything, monsieur. Poirot replied, his tone measured. The letters I found suggest a scandal, one that involved the Major and, perhaps, others in this room. A scandal that has resurfaced, threatening the harmony of this engagement. Tell me, what was your connection to Major Hagen? Zachariah spoke. Before Gideon could respond, his voice trembling. We knew him, in South Africa. He was our commanding officer for a time. But that's all. We haven't seen him in years. Not until he showed up here. Poirot tilted his head, studying Zachariah's nervous demeanor. And yet, monsieur, you seem most unsettled by his presence. Why is that? Zachariah's hands twisted in his lap. It's nothing. Just bad memories. The war wasn't kind to any of us. Poirot turned to Cassandra. Madame van den Bosch, you were in South Africa as well, were you not? During the war, your family had business interests there, I presume. Cassandra's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. Yes, my late husband, Angeline's father, was involved in trade. We lived in Pretoria for several years before returning to Belgium. But I fail to see how this is relevant. It is relevant, madame, because secrets do not stay buried forever, Poirot said, his voice soft but firm. I have reason to believe that the blackmailer's demands are tied to events. From that time, a scandal, perhaps, involving mistaken identities or hidden relationships. Tell me, did you ever encounter Major Hagen during those years? Cassandra hesitated, her fingers brushing the pearl necklace at her throat. I may have met him, once or twice. He was a friend of my husband's, but we were not close. Poirot's moustache twitched again, a sign that he had caught the faint tremor in her voice. Not close, you say. And yet, madame, I have found evidence that suggests otherwise. A photograph, hidden away in a secret room, shows Major Hagen with a woman who bears a striking resemblance to you. The room fell silent. Angeline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Gideon's head snapped toward his future mother-in-law, his expression a mix of shock and suspicion. Zachariah stared at the floor, his knuckles white. Cassandra, however, remained composed, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. That is absurd, she said, her voice icy. You must be mistaken, Monsieur Poirot. I am never mistaken about such things, Poirot replied, his tone unwavering. But let us set that aside for a moment. There is another matter I wish to discuss, matter of payment, you see. I have learned that you, madame, have paid off a blackmailer before, years ago, in South Africa. Is this not true? Cassandra's composure faltered, her cheeks paling. How? How did you know that? Poirot smiled faintly. The little grey cells, madame. They pieced together the puzzle. The letters in the hidden room mentioned payments made to silence a scandal. Payments made by you, I presume, to protect your family's reputation. What was the nature of this scandal? Cassandra rose from her seat, her hands trembling slightly. This is outrageous. I will not be interrogated in my own home. Sit down, madame, Poirot said, his voice sharp now. 2 people are dead, and the truth will not be denied. If you wish to protect your daughter and her future, you will answer my questions. Angeline reached for her mother's hand, her eyes pleading. Mother, please. If you know something, tell him. We can't go on like this. Cassandra sank back into her seat, her shoulders slumping. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a private matter. During the war, there were rumors about my husband, about his business dealings. Some said he was involved in unsavory practices, smuggling, perhaps. I paid to keep those rumors quiet, to protect Angeline and our family's name. Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. And Major Hagen, was he involved in these dealings? Cassandra hesitated, then nodded. He knew about them. He helped my husband, in a way. But it was complicated. There were others involved, people who wanted to exploit the situation. I paid to ensure their silence. Poirot turned to Gideon and Zachariah. And you, messieurs, you were in South Africa during this time. Did you know of these dealings? Face darkened. We were soldiers, Poirot. We followed orders. If there was anything shady going on, we weren't part of it. But Zachariah's reaction was different. His hands shook, and he avoided Poirot's gaze. I heard things, he admitted. Rumors, mostly, about the Major and some of the officers. They said he was mixed up in something dirty, but I didn't know the details. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Merci, Monsieur Zachariah. Your honesty is most illuminating. Now, let us consider another piece of the puzzle. The photograph, it shows Major Hagen with a woman who, as I have said, resembles Madame van den Bosch. But there is another figure in the background, barely visible. A young man, perhaps a soldier. I believe this young man is one of you, Messieurs Demire. Gideon's eyes widened. You're grasping at straws, Poirot. That could be anyone. None, Monsieur Poirot said, holding up a hand. The photograph is dated 1900, during the Boer War. You and your brother were both in South Africa. At that time, serving under Major Hagen, I find it most curious that you claim no knowledge of this scandal, when you were so closely connected to the man at its center. Zachariah's head snapped up, his eyes wild. What are you implying, Poirot? That we had something to do with his death? I imply nothing, Poirot said calmly. I merely observe. And what I observe is a family with secrets, a past that refuses to stay buried. The Major's death, Rowanna's poisoning, the blackmail letters all are connected to this past. But there is one final piece I must uncover, the nature of the scandal itself. Poirot paced the room, his hands clasped. Behind his back, let us reconstruct, Nan. During the Boer War, Major Hagen was involved in something. Unsavory, smuggling, perhaps, or worse. Madame van den Bosch paid to keep this quiet, but the truth lingered like a shadow. Years later, the Major arrives at this manor, invited to an engagement party. Why? To expose the truth, to blackmail someone anew, or perhaps to settle an old score. He stopped, turning to face the group. And then there is the matter of mistaken identity. The Major's coat, worn by someone else, Rowanna's boots, suggesting she impersonated someone. These are not random acts, Mies, Amos. They are deliberate, designed to confuse and mislead. But Hercule Poirot is not so easily fooled. Angeline's voice broke the silence. Monsieur Poirot, are you saying the blackmailer is someone in this room? Poirot nodded gravely. It is possible, mademoiselle, but to find the truth, we must dig deeper into your family's past. Tell me, Madame Van Den Bosch? Was there ever a question of legitimacy? An heir, perhaps, whose origins were kept secret? Cassandra's face went ashen. "How dare you?" she whispered. "You go too far, monsieur." But Poirot was relentless. "I go where the truth leads, madame." The letters in the hidden room spoke of a child, born in secret, whose existence could ruin the Van Den Bosch name. "Is this the scandal you paid to conceal?" The room was deathly silent. Angeline looked at her mother, her eyes wide with shock. Gideon and Zachariah exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. Archibald, standing by the door, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to Cassandra. Finally, Cassandra spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. "There was a child, not mine, but my husband's. A mistake from before we were married. I paid to keep it quiet, to protect Angeline's future. The Major knew about it. He threatened to reveal it years ago. I thought it was over, but then he came here." Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "And this child, madame, where are they now?" Cassandra shook her head. "I don't know. I never knew. My husband handled it, and I didn't ask questions. I just wanted it to go away." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. The scandal, the blackmail, the murders all were tied to this hidden child, this secret that had festered for decades. But who was the blackmailer now? And who had killed Major Hagan and Rohanna? He turned to Zachariah. "Monsieur, you have been most silent. Tell me, what do you know of this child?" Zachariah's face crumpled, and he buried his head in his hands. "I didn't want any of this," he said, his voice muffled. "I just wanted to move on. The Major, he came to me before. The party, he said he had proof that would ruin everything. He wanted money, but I didn't have it. I told him to leave us alone, and did he?" Poirot asked, his eyes narrowing. Zachariah shook his head. "No," he laughed, "said the truth would come out, one way or another. I didn't know what to do." Poirot's mind map seemed to pulse in his mind, the connections growing clearer. The Major's blackmail scheme had been a catalyst, stirring up old wounds and hidden truths. But someone had taken it further, turning blackmail into murder. The question was who? As the day wore on, Poirot continued his interrogations, piecing together the fractured history of the Van Den Bosch and Demir families. He learned that Gideon and Zachariah had been young soldiers under Major Hagan's command, caught up in the chaos of the Boer War. The Major had been a ruthless officer, known for bending the rules to his advantage. There were whispers of stolen goods, of deals made in the shadows of the war-torn landscape. Gideon claimed ignorance, but Zachariah's nervous demeanor suggested he knew more than he let on. Poirot also uncovered a deeper rift between the brothers. Gideon, the elder, had always been the golden child, ambitious and confident, destined for greatness. Zachariah, on the other hand, had struggled with the horrors of war, suffering from shell shock that left him fragile and haunted. The Major's reappearance had clearly shaken him, rekindling memories he had tried to bury. As for Cassandra, her role in the scandal became clearer. She had been a young wife in South Africa, desperate to protect her family's reputation. The payments she made to silence the rumors had drained her resources, but they had bought her peace until now. The Major's arrival had threatened to unravel everything, and Poirot suspected she would stop at nothing to protect her daughter's future by evening. Poirot returned to the library, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The photograph, the letters, the blackmail, the murders all pointed to a tangled web of motives and secrets. He added new lines to his mind map, connecting Zachariah's shell shock to his fear of the Major, Cassandra's payments to the hidden child, and the Major's coat to the theme of mistaken identity. But one question remained: who had taken the final step, crossing from blackmail to murder? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Angeline, her face pale but determined. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said earlier." Poirot gestured for her to sit. "Speak, mademoiselle. The truth is the only way forward." Angeline took a deep breath. "It's about my mother. She has been acting strange since the Major arrived. I overheard her talking to Archibald, the butler, late at night. They were arguing about something about the past. I didn't catch everything, but I heard her say, 'It can't come out now. Not after all these years.'" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Most interesting, mademoiselle. And what of Archibald? Did he seem complicit in this secret?" Angeline nodded. "He was upset, but he agreed to do whatever she asked. I think he's been helping her cover something up." Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have given me much to consider. Rest assured, Hercule Poirot will find the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried." As Angeline left, Poirot turned back to his mind map, adding Archibald's name to the web. The butler's staged phone call, his nervous demeanour, his proximity to Cassandra suggested he was more than a mere servant. Could he be the key to unlocking the final secret? The night deepened, and the manor grew quiet, save for the howling wind outside. Poirot sat alone, his eyes fixed on the photograph. The woman, so like Cassandra, the young soldier in the background, possibly Gideon, or Zach, and the Major at the center of it all, his smug smile a challenge from beyond the grave. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the final threads of the mystery. He knew the truth was close, tantalizingly close. The scandal of the Boer War, the hidden child, the mistaken identities all were part of a larger tapestry, one that had led to murder. But to prove it, he would need to confront the killer directly, to lay bare the secrets that had festered in the heart of the Van den Bosch family. As the clock struck midnight, Poirot closed his notebook, his resolve hardened. Tomorrow he would gather the guests once more, and the truth would be revealed. The little grey cells had done their work, and the hidden truth was about to be unveiled. Chapter 10. The impersonator revealed. The snow continued to blanket the Van den Bosch manor, its relentless fall muffling the world outside and lending an eerie stillness to the grand house. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion, the weight of 2 murders, Major Felix Hogan's and Roanna's, pressing on every guest and staff member. Hercule Poirot, his sharp eyes glinting in the dim light of the chandelier-lit drawing-room, stood at the center of it all, his mind a whirl of connections, his little grey cells piecing together the intricate puzzle of deceit. The discovery of the secret room and the photograph of the Major with an unknown woman had shifted the investigation. And now, as the Belgian detective prepared to unravel the thread of mistaken identity, the manor seemed to hold its breath. Poirot had spent the morning in solitude, his notebook open before him, his pen sketching an elaborate mind map. Lines crisscrossed the page, linking names, motives, and clues. The Major's coat worn by another, the muddy footprints that led nowhere, the cryptic note about a hidden truth, And now the photograph and letters from the secret room. The idea of an impersonator had taken root, and Poirot was certain it was the key to unlocking the mystery. The Major's death, staged to look like a suicide, had been a deliberate misdirection, and the murderer had used the coat to confuse any witnesses. But who had worn it, and why? As the clock struck noon, Poirot summoned the household to the library where the first murder had occurred. The room, with its towering bookshelves and heavy velvet curtains, felt oppressive. The memory of Major Hogan's body slumped over the desk, still vivid. The guests filed in, their faces a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Angeline van den Bosch, her delicate features pale but composed, stood beside her fiancé Gideon Demire, whose dark eyes darted nervously. His brother, Zachariah, lingered near the back, his hands fidgeting, his expression haunted. Archibald Sterling, the butler, maintained his rigid posture, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Cassandra, Angeline's mother, sat regally in an armchair, her lips pressed into a thin line. The remaining guests assorted cousins, a family friend, and the Manor's cook huddled together, whispering. Poirot cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Madame et messieurs, we are gathered here to confront the truther, truth that has been hidden beneath layers of deception, like the snow that covers the grounds of this manor. 2 lives have been taken, and the murderer or murderers stand among us. But fear not, for Hercule Poirot has seen through the veil of lies. A ripple of tension passed through the room. Gideon shifted uncomfortably, while Zachariah's hands stilled, his gaze fixed on the floor. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking on the hardwood. Let us begin with the death of Major Felix Hagen, he said, his voice measured. A man with a past cloaked in shadow, found stabbed in this very room. The scene suggested suicide, a letter opener in his hand, a note in his pocket. But the little grey cells, they do not accept such a simple tale. The angle of the wound, the absence of blood on the blade's handle, the coat that did not fit the Major's frame, these were the signs of a staged crime. Someone wore the Major's coat to be seen as him, to create confusion. An impersonator, but who? He paused, his eyes scanning the room. Angeline's fingers tightened around Gideon's arm. Cassandra's expression remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the armrest. Poirot continued. The muddy footprints, they led nowhere, another trick. The note in the Major's pocket spoke of a hidden truth, and then, in the secret room behind this very wall, he gestured to the bookshelf that concealed the passage. I found letters and a photograph. The Major, he was connected to a scandal, perhaps from the Boer War, and someone in this house knew of it. Someone who wished to keep it buried. Zachariah's head snapped up, his eyes wide. What are you implying, Monsieur Poirot? I had nothing to do with that man's death. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, Monsieur Zachariah. We shall come to you in time. First, let us consider the second murder, that of Ruana, the maid. Poisoned in the pantry, her death was no accident. In her room, I found a pair of boots, worn and muddy, though she claimed to have been indoors all evening. Why? Because she, too, played a part in this masquerade. She impersonated someone, perhaps unknowingly, and paid the ultimate price for what she knew. The cook gasped, clutching her apron. Ruana, she was just a girl. Why would anyone harm her? Because, Poirot said gravely, she knew too much. She saw something or someone that night in the library, and the murderer could not allow her to speak. Poirot turned to Archibald, whose face had grown pale. Monsieur Sterling, you have served this house for many years. You know its secrets, its hidden passages. You were the first to find the Major's body, were you not? And yet, your account of that night, it changes. First, you say you heard a noise and came at once. Then, you claim you were delayed by a phone call. A call that, I have confirmed, never occurred. Archibald's mouth opened, then closed. I must have been mistaken, sir. The shock of finding the Major and Poirot's voice was sharp. You were not mistaken. You lied. You wore the Major's coat that night, did you not? You were seen leaving the library, ensuring the guests would believe the Major was still alive. But he was already dead, and you, Monsieur Sterling, were part of the deception. The room erupted in gasps. Angeline cried out, Archibald, that's impossible. He's been with us for years. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Loyalty, mademoiselle, can be a mask. The mind map, it shows me the connections. The Major's coat, too large for his frame, fit you perfectly, Monsieur Sterling. The footprints, they were yours, carefully placed to mislead. And the phone call, a fabrication to explain your absence during the critical moments. Archibald's composure cracked, his hands trembling. This is absurd. I'm no murderer. Perhaps not, Poirot conceded. But you are an accomplice. You helped stage the scene, and you know who wielded the letter opener. Tell me, monsieur. Sterling, who was it? Who gave you the coat and the orders? Archibald's eyes darted to Cassandra, then away. The room fell silent, all eyes on the butler. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low but firm. You cannot protect them forever. The truth, it will emerge, like the sun after the snow. Cassandra stood abruptly, her voice icy. This is enough, Monsieur Poirot. You accuse my staff without evidence. Archibald is loyal to this family. He would never, Madame Poirot interrupted. Your loyalty to your staff is admirable, but it blinds you. Or perhaps it is not blindness, but fear of what? Else I might uncover. The photograph in the secret room, it shows the Major with a woman who bears a striking resemblance to you, Madame Cassandra, from years ago. A scandal, perhaps, from your youth. A secret you paid to keep hidden. Cassandra's face drained of colour, but she held her ground. You overstep, monsieur. My past is no one's business. But it is, Poirot said softly. It is the business of the murderer who used your secrets to manipulate this tragedy. The blackmail letters sent to Mademoiselle Angel were not about her, but about you. The hidden truth was yours, madame, and someone in this house knew it. Gideon stepped forward, his voice strained. Poirot, you're saying my mother-in-law is involved. That's madness. She's been nothing but supportive of our engagement. Poirot turned to Gideon, his expression unreadable. Monsieur de Mir, your loyalty to your future mother-in-law is commendable, but your own secrets are not without scrutiny. You and your brother Zachariah, you knew the Major from South Africa, did you not? The photograph in the secret room, it shows you both. With him, a shared history, one that you have not fully disclosed. Zachariah's hands clenched into fists. That was years ago. The Major was a liar, a cheat. He ruined lives during the war, but I didn't kill him. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. Nan, Monsieur Zachariah, I do not believe. You struck the fatal blow, but you played a role. Your shell shock, your resentment toward the Major writ made you vulnerable. Someone used you, just as they used Monsieur Sterling. The room was a powder keg. every word from Poirot igniting new sparks of fear and accusation. He paced again, his mind map now vivid in his mind, the lines converging on a single point. "Let us reconstruct the night of the murder," he said. "The Major, he was not the man he seemed. He orchestrated a blackmail scheme to ruin Mademoiselle Angeline's engagement, perhaps out of spite or greed. But he was betrayed. Someone, his accomplice, turned on him, stabbed him, and used his coat to create the illusion of his presence elsewhere. That accomplice, they are in this room." Poirot stopped before Zachariah, his eyes piercing. "Monsieur Zachariah, you were seen arguing with the Major earlier that day. You were shaken, your shell shock triggered by his taunts. You agreed to help him, did you not? To wear his coat, to be seen in his place, to confuse the timeline. But you did not expect him to die." Zachariah's face crumpled, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't kill him. He asked me to help, said it was just a prank to scare Angeline. I wore the coat, walked through the hall, but when I returned, he was dead. I swear it." "And who," Poirot pressed, "told you to keep silent? Who convinced you to lie?" Eyes flicked to Archibald, then to Cassandra. He shook his head, tears welling. I can't say." Poirot turned to the group, his voice rising. "The impersonator has been revealed, but the murderer remains. The Major's death was planned, but Rowanna's was not. She saw something that night, perhaps the true killer, perhaps the coat being handed to Monsieur Sterling or Monsieur Zachariah, and so she was silenced with poison. The question is, who had the opportunity and the motive to kill twice?" The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words sinking in. Angeline clung to Gideon, her eyes wide with fear. Cassandra's composure wavered, her hands trembling slightly. Archibald stared at the floor, his silence damning. Poirot continued, his voice steady. "The mind map, it leads me to a conclusion. The Major's blackmail was a distraction, a means to an end. The true motive lies in the manor itself, its secrets, its history. The letters in the secret room, they speak of an illegitimate heir, a scandal that could ruin the Van den Bosch name. Madame Cassandra, you paid a blackmailer years ago to keep this secret. But someone else knew, someone who used it to manipulate. This tragedy," Cassandra's eyes blazed. "You have no proof, Monsieur Poirot. These are wild accusations." "Proof," Poirot said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "The proof is in the details. The worn boots in Rowanna's room, they matched the footprints near the library. She was not the impersonator, but she was close to the truth. And you, madame, you were in the pantry the morning of her death, were you not? You claimed to be checking supplies, but perhaps you were ensuring the poison took effect." Cassandra's face went ashen, but she said nothing. Poirot turned to the group, his voice commanding. "The impersonator, Monsieur Sterling, played his part. Monsieur Zachariah, you were manipulated by your past. But the true architect of this tragedy, the one who orchestrated the deaths to protect a secret, stands before us." He pointed to Cassandra. "Madame, it was you who poisoned Rowanna. You feared she would expose the truth, not just of the Major's scheme, but of your family's past. The illegitimate heir, the scandal, it was too much to risk. You acted to protect your daughter, your name, your manor." Cassandra's shoulders slumped, her regal facade crumbling. I had no choice," she whispered. "Rowanna overheard me speaking with the Major. She knew about the letters, the heir. I couldn't let her destroy us." Angeline gasped, pulling away from her mother. Mother, how could you? Poirot's expression was sombre. The hidden truth, it is unveiled. The Major's death was a betrayal by his accomplice, Monsieur Zachariah, who was manipulated by Madame Cassandra. Rowena's death was a desperate act to silence her knowledge. The mistaken identity, it was a tool to confuse. But the little grey cells, they see clearly. The room was silent, the weight of the revelation settling over the guests. Geddy held Angeline as she wept, while Zachariah sank into a chair, his face in his hands. Archibald, his role as an accomplice exposed, stood frozen. Poirot turned to the group. The authorities will be informed once the snow clears. Justice, it will be served. But for now, let us remember that the truth, it is a powerful thing. It cannot be buried forever. As the guests dispersed, their whispers echoing in the cavernous library, Poirot stood alone, his notebook closed. The mind map was complete, the puzzle solved. He glanced at the snow-covered window, the world outside still and quiet. The little grey cells, he murmured, they never fail. The manor, once a place of secrets and deception, now lay bare, its hidden truths brought to light by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot.